Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the still, smoky hush of another century. It's the kind of quiet that only ever comes at the very edge of exhaustion, when every sound outside the window feels distant, blurred by the heavy weight of a long day behind you. It's 1883 and you're not on a history tour or flipping through a textbook. You're there. You live on Orchard Street in a 5-story tenement that leans just a little to one side. Your home isn't a place of comfort. It's just where you sleep, or try to. The room is narrow, the ceiling low, and the air hangs with the faint, sour blend of boiled onions, wet boots, old coal smoke, and the sweet tang of iron from the shared wash basin out in the hall. You share your world with rats and roaches, but also with people, lots of them. 8 of you in this one-room flat. And when the gaslight sputters out for the night, the true ritual begins. Everyone trying to claim just enough space to breathe without bumping elbows or dreams. But before we pull the quilt over our shoulders and drift back into that other life, I'd love it if you'd do something for me. If this story feels like a soft landing for your thoughts tonight, take a second to like the video or subscribe, only if it feels right. No pressure. And if you feel like sharing where you're listening from or what time it is there, I'd be genuinely curious. It always warms me to see this quiet little circle of listeners stretching across different time zones and corners of the world. Now maybe dim the lights a bit, let a fan murmur softly in the background if that helps you settle. This story is meant to wander. There's no rush, no climax waiting around the bend. Just one long breath of history designed to lull. The room you're in used to be a parlor, back when the building was new, and they imagined these tenements would be decent housing for decent workers. That didn't last long. Now the plaster walls are cracked and darkened with time, the floorboards are warped from years of wet boots and overfilled wash buckets. There's one window at the far end, crusted with city grime and streaked with soot, always rattling in its frame when the wind picks up. And tonight, as it often does, the wind carries voices. Someone on the street below, shouting in a language that isn't yours, another yelling back from across the way, laughter from a bar 2 blocks down, the soft clip-clop of hooves and the tin rattle of wheels on cobblestone, never ending, never far. Your bed, if you call it that, is a sagging frame with ropes instead of springs, half covered in a blanket, patched so many times it looks like a quilt made of stories. There's straw poking through the mattress, the kind that makes you itch if you sleep in the wrong direction. You're pressed up against your older brother's back, your little sister's hand draped across your ribs, your youngest sibling's breath puffing warm and slightly sour near your shoulder. You don't talk much once the light goes out. There isn't room for secrets here. There isn't even room to stretch. And yet, despite the closeness, the room feels cold, not from weather, though winter drafts creep through every crack, but from the weight of tiredness. The kind that presses into every joint, makes every blanket feel thinner. Your mother still sits at the table by the stove, mending a shirt by the orange glow of a coal ember. Her fingers move with the rhythm of repetition, not urgency. Your father snores already, flat on the pallet near the door, his boots still on, his hat tipped down over his eyes. He'll be up before the sun, walking to the hiring yard and hoping his name gets called. Somewhere beneath the floorboards you can hear rats scratching, always moving, always near. It doesn't bother you, not anymore. They're just another part of the house, like the cracked mirror on the wall or the warped spoon in the drawer. You stopped being afraid of them a long time ago. Fear, like privacy, is a luxury here. You learn to ignore both. The ceiling creaks with footsteps, someone pacing upstairs. Maybe Mr. Abramowitz, the night shift baker who sleeps in the mornings and never quite stops moving in the evenings. Or maybe it's that new family from Galway. They moved in last week, 10 of them in one flat, still figuring out which floorboard groans and which one bites. There's always someone new, always someone arriving with a bundle of clothes and a look of hope that hasn't yet soured into endurance. Sleep doesn't come all at once here. It comes in waves, in shifts. First, the little ones drift off, their breaths deep and soft, then your mother, her head finally nodding toward her chest. You lie awake a little longer, eyes half shut, listening to the rhythm of the room, the sighs, the rustle of fabric, the drip from the leaking pipe in the ceiling that no one's bothered to fix in years. You listen to the building breathe, every wall holding a secret, every floorboard carrying the stories of the people pressed above and below. You wonder if the family on the floor beneath you is sleeping yet, or if their baby is still crying like she was during supper. Outside the window, the gas lamps cast a pale glow over the street. You can just see the shadows of laundry flapping between buildings, caught in the breeze like tired flags from too many nations. There are voices below, someone selling bread late, someone else arguing, a woman laughing, sharp and sudden, then quiet again. The city doesn't sleep. Not really. It just turns down the volume for a while. And so you lie there, on your side, legs curled, shoulders squeezed between warmth and discomfort. You can't remember the last time you had a pillow to yourself. You can't remember the last time your spine didn't ache by morning, but still you manage to close your eyes, because sleep isn't about comfort anymore. It's just something your body takes when it can. In this room, in this year, in this life, sleep comes like everything else. Slowly, quietly, pressed between other people's needs. And as the last sound you hear fades into a child's sleepy murmur beside you, the building groans a little deeper, settling into the night. The kind of night that doesn't ask anything of you except to keep breathing, to keep resting, to make it through until morning. Your eyes open again, just slightly, as the warmth beside you shifts. One of your brothers has turned in his sleep, pulling more of the blanket toward himself without knowing it. You don't reach for it. The chill that creeps across your legs is familiar, expected, even oddly comforting. It reminds you that you're still here, still in this room, still part of the body of your family. You tuck your knees a little closer, making yourself small, the way you've learned to do since you were barely old enough to take up any space. The mattress groaned softly beneath you, not from your weight alone, but from the quiet tension of too many bodies packed close, each one trying to drift deeper without waking the rest. Outside, the city seems to hold its breath for a few long seconds. Then it starts again, a clang of metal far off, someone dumping ash buckets into the alley, or a coal wagon shifting on uneven stone. The wind sighs between the buildings and finds its way in through the crack near the windowsill. It snakes along the floor, curls around your ankles. You wonder if it's the same wind that passed through your uncle's coat where he sleeps near the door. He coughs once, a rough, barking sound, and shifts without fully waking. Everyone here learns to sleep lightly. The walls are too thin for dreams to go uninterrupted. There are voices even now, not shouts, not songs, just murmurs. In the room across the hall, two women are still talking low. You recognize one of the voices. It's Mrs. Kazmarek, who sells buttons and thread from a box on Broome Street. The other must be her daughter, the one who hasn't spoken to you directly since moving in, but always nods politely at the stairs. Their words blend with the quiet like threads through old cloth, a soft foreign tongue you don't understand but recognize by its melody. It reminds you of how many families are packed into this one building, each one carrying their own bundle of sorrows and stories. Under this roof, languages weave together: Yiddish, Italian, Irish English, Polish, German, and yet everyone understands the same thing. Survival isn't spoken, it's done. Your little sister, curled near your back, whimpers in her sleep and murmurs your name. Her hand searches blindly and finds your arm. You shift just enough to wrap it around her small frame. She exhales, and you feel her settle again. She always does that when she's scared. Even in sleep, she knows to reach for something solid. You remember the first few nights after your family moved here from the old apartment on 2nd Avenue, when this room was still strange and the mattress smelled unfamiliar. She had cried into your chest then, hiccuping with fear and the leftover ache of goodbye. The old place had been worse in some ways, smaller, wetter. But it had also been known. This place, though still rough, has started to feel like yours in the only way it can, through repetition. Sometimes, in the stillness between midnight and morning, you wonder what the rest of the world is doing. You think about the wealthier houses you've heard about but never seen, with velvet curtains and carpets thick enough to muffle footsteps. Do their children lie awake at night, ears trained on the creak of their own ceilings? Do they worry about how many hours their fathers will be hired this week? You imagine the softness of their beds, the sweetness of their air, filtered somehow, distant from the staleness that lives in your lungs. But then your sister's breath tickles your collarbone, and you're brought back to the only world you've ever truly known. This one, with its cramped warmth and borrowed blankets. The mattress creaks again as your older brother shifts, likely half dreaming of the docks where he works whenever he can sneak past the foreman and snag a crate to haul. His hands are calloused beyond his years. You've seen him wince when he flexes his fingers in the cold, but he never says anything. None of you do. Pain is private, even when everything else is shared. Your mother says God watches most kindly over those who suffer quietly. You're not sure if she believes it, or if it just makes the days easier to bear. There's a lull then, the kind that happens when the whole building exhales. It's not silence, not truly, but the closest you'll ever get. A dog barks distantly. A window creaks. And beneath all that, the faint rumble of the city turning over in its sleep. You press your cheek against the shoulder of the person beside you and let your thoughts stretch just enough to wonder what it might feel like to have a room of your own. A door that shuts, a floor without groans, a pillow that smells only of you. It's a foolish thought, one your mother would scold you for. But it's not a hope, just a curiosity. You've learned to keep your dreams light enough to carry. Your father stirs near the stove. You hear the faint rustle of his coat, the muffled pop of a saw joint moving too quickly. He doesn't rise yet, but you know it won't be long. He always wakes before the light comes, as if afraid the morning might slip past him and take the day's work with it. He's lucky when he gets a job hauling bricks at the construction site by the bridge. Less lucky when it's just another line up at the shipyards waiting while men shout names and half the crowd slinks away empty-handed. You've seen how he walks when he comes home, without pay, back straighter than ever, shoulders tight, jaw set so hard it looks like stone. He says nothing on those nights. Just eats slowly, bites too long on crusts of bread, and stares out the window as if the soot-streaked glass might one day show him something different. Sometimes, when you lie awake this long, the room starts to lose its edges. Shapes blur. The light from the window softens into a watercolor of grey. You no longer see the cracks in the plaster or the damp spots near the corner where the roof leaks in heavy rain. Instead, you feel the weight of the house itself. A tired, groaning thing made of brick and breath. It feels older than it should, worn down by the same lives it holds. And yet within that exhaustion, there's a kind of comfort, not joy, not peace, but something quieter, something close to belonging. Your mother finally folds the shirt she's been mending and slips it under the bench. Her fingers move slowly now. She stands and stretches, joints popping, and then lowers herself onto the pallet beside your father. They don't speak. There's no need. Her hand finds his, and you see their fingers intertwine, shadows in the dark. You wonder what they whisper to each other in the hours you're meant to be asleep. Do they talk about leaving the city? About saving enough to go west, maybe find a farm? Or do they speak of nothing at all, just press their palms together like people who've made a life out of being close, even when the world is not kind? The window glows a little brighter now. Morning is near. The city is already waking. Footsteps sound in the hall, brisk and tired. A door opens, then shuts quickly. Somewhere below, a kettle whistles. Steam rises into the cracks of the building, curling like the breath of the day itself. Your limbs feel heavy. Sleep comes not as rest, but as surrender. And in this narrow bed, in this overfilled room where dreams must be folded small to fit, you finally begin to drift. You don't remember exactly when you fell asleep. The air had turned a little warmer by the time you let go of the thoughts that clung to you like lint. And somehow, in the space between one blink and the next, the weight in your limbs shifted from ache to numbness. Now, as the soft blue hush of morning stretches across the city, you wake to the sound of your mother's feet on the floor. She moves quietly, but in a room like this, even quiet sounds have volume. You hear her knees creak as she bends near the stove, the slow clink of the coal scoop brushing metal. There's a hush of fabric as she folds away the blanket she slept under and shakes out her shawl to wrap around her shoulders. Her breath is heavier this morning, not a sigh exactly, just a certain tiredness in the way she exhales, as if even waking is an effort. The mattress is still warm beside you. Your sister is buried under the quilt, only her tangled hair and one arm visible. You gently shift yourself up, not fully rising, just adjusting so that you don't disturb the balance too soon. Once one of you is up, everyone starts waking, and your mother values these last few moments of semi-silence like they're pearls. Her hands move through the motions of breakfast as if led by memory alone. She stirs a pot of water with a wooden spoon, stokes the coals with a practiced rhythm, and lays out the dented tin cups without ever looking at them. The room smells faintly of last night's cabbage with a layer of damp wool and old bread. Your father's coat hangs from a nail near the door, drying slowly from the dew it collected during his early walk down to the workyard. The light grows stronger and thinner at the same time. It bleeds through the dirt-smudged window pane like it's shy about being seen. Dust motes dance in the beam that cuts across the wooden table, catching in your mother's hair as she leans over the kettle. She used to sing in the mornings, little Polish lullabies, songs her own mother used to hum while kneading dough or folding linens. But lately, the music has faded. There are too many worries in the space where melody once lived. Rent is due in 4 days. The coal bucket is only half full. Your younger brother's cough has returned, dry and sharp, though he tries to hide it. Still your mother hums under her breath now and then, as if trying to remember what it felt like to feel lighter. You rise quietly, careful not to bump into anyone. The floorboards are cold beneath your feet, worn smooth from years of traffic. Your brother shifts and groans softly but doesn't wake. Your uncle, on the pallet near the door, is already gone. He leaves before dawn most days, delivering crates from the brewery down on Houston Street. You wonder how long it's been since he had a morning where he woke naturally rather than being chased out by the weight of a responsibility that barely pays. The stove crackles softly now. Your mother adds a pinch of something to the pot. Probably salt if there's any left. Or lard scrapings. It's not for flavor, not really. Just for the sense of doing something to help. Breakfast isn't something to look forward to. It's a formality. Warm water and a bit of flour stirred into a loose paste, swallowed without ceremony. You sit on the bench by the wall, rubbing your arms for warmth. Your breath fogs slightly in the air. It's warmer than outside, but not by much. The walls hold the cold long after the sun rises. There's a chill that lives in the bones of the building, a kind of memory in the mortar, as if every winter it's endured still whispers through the cracks. You hear a commotion out in the hallway now. The woman in the apartment next door is scolding her son. He must have tracked soot across the floor again. Her voice cuts sharp through the thin plaster. Then silence. A door slams. Then footsteps thud down the stairs. Life in this building never waits for a decent hour to begin. Your little sister finally wakes, blinking against the light like a kitten stirred too soon. She clutches the edge of the blanket and curls inward, as if shrinking might buy her more sleep. Your mother turns, catches your eye, and nods toward the water basin. You rise and walk to it without protest. The water is cold and metallic against your fingers. You dip the rag, wring it out, and press it to your face. The shock of it is nearly violent, waking you faster than any dream ever could. You hand the cloth to your sister next, and she flinches when it touches her skin. But she doesn't complain. Complaints are for people with options. Here, everyone learns early to swallow them. The day truly begins when your father returns. The sound of his boots in the hallway brings your mother upright. She glances toward the door, and you all wait, your ears straining for the rhythm in his step. If it's heavy, you'll know he didn't get work today. If it's quick and light, then he's been chosen for something. The door opens and his shoulders are hunched forward in a way that tells you the answer before he even speaks. He hangs his hat slowly, dusting it off on his thigh. Your mother sets a cup in front of him, and he drinks it without a word, the steam fogging his glasses. It's not defeat in his posture exactly, just exhaustion, the kind that comes when trying stops yielding anything new. Your brother wakes then, followed by the rest of the room. The children shuffle and yawn, the bed creaks with the weight of movement. Your father eats his bowl of mush, scraping the bottom clean with the back of his spoon. He sets the bowl down and finally speaks, a few quiet words to your mother about how long the line was, how many men showed up early. Your mother just nods, wipes her hands on her apron, and turns back to the pot. The routine is familiar to them both. Hope measured in bowls and the silence after they're emptied. The rest of the morning unfolds in layers. Your older brother pulls on his boots and heads to the loading docks, hoping to be waved in for an extra shift. Your younger sister braids her hair with practiced fingers, her hands moving mechanically as she watches the light climb the wall. You're sent to the grocer to see if yesterday's bread is any cheaper today. You pass through the narrow hallway, stepping around a puddle of something you don't want to identify. You nod to the man on the stairs who always tips his cap, but never speaks. The stairwell smells like cabbage and coal. It always does. You breathe through your mouth until you reach the door. Outside, the street is already full. Children dart between wagons. Vendors shout in a dozen languages. A dog barks near the butcher's stall. The cold cuts through your coat as you step onto the sidewalk. But there's something honest about the cold. At least it doesn't pretend. You keep your head down and your feet moving. This is your world. Not glamorous, not gentle, but real. And this morning, like every morning, you move through it one step at a time. Back inside, your mother will finish folding the linens that barely dry in the corner of the room. She'll light the lamp again when the shadows fall, and the routine will reverse itself. The bed will fill once more. The room will settle again into a tight hush, and all of you will lie in the same spots, pressed together beneath the same blanket, waiting for sleep to come like a familiar visitor who never brings anything but quiet. The walk to the baker's shop was cold enough to bite through the wool of your coat. Your fingers, even buried in your pockets, ached with that dull sting that comes when frost flirts with skin. The wind doesn't howl this morning. It whispers, steady and low, the kind of wind that finds its way into your sleeves and makes itself at home. You counted the cracks in the sidewalk like you always do. Not out of habit exactly, but because looking down feels easier. It keeps your eyes off the faces around you, the ones you know and the ones you don't. There are too many people out already, all of them with their own errands, their own little missions for the day. Some women carry laundry baskets on their hips, cloth steaming with the last of the washhouse's heat. A man with a cane stumbles from one stoop to the next, probably on his way to the labor hall, though no one would pick him now. His hand trembles even on the rail. You watch him go and you don't say anything. Everyone's fighting their own invisible thing. You've learned to keep your eyes on the cracks. The baker's window is fogged over, the top corners still rimmed with frost despite the glowing oven inside. The bell above the door tinkles when you push it open, and the warmth hits you like a wall. It smells like yeast and scorched flour, sharp and familiar. You can feel the heat on your cheeks before your feet have even crossed the threshold. Inside, a line of women huddles near the wall. Some talk softly, some hold coins close in gloved hands, some just stand, eyes half-lidded with tiredness. You step in behind them, nodding politely to no one in particular. The man behind the counter, the baker's son, doesn't look up. His hands move quickly, brushing crumbs from trays, bagging loaves with wax paper, counting change without ever really looking. You try to catch his eye, to ask if yesterday's bread has dropped in price. When he finally glances your way, it's only for a second. Then he shrugs. A half loaf for a penny. It's more than you were hoping to pay, but less than it was yesterday, and that has to count for something. You hand him the coin and take the warm, stale bundle, holding it close to your chest, like it might offer a little of its heat. Back outside, the cold waits patiently. The bread cools too quickly in your arms, but it still feels like a prize. You start walking home, moving faster this time. Your boots scrape along the edge of the sidewalk, avoiding the worst of the slush. You pass the same vendors again, their carts puffing little clouds of steam into the grey air. A woman argues with a customer in Yiddish, waving her hand over a basket of onions. A boy with red cheeks and no gloves is selling newspapers, his voice cracking as he yells the headlines. You catch a few words: strike, fire, something about the mayor. You don't really care. Those headlines belong to people with offices and overcoats, not to anyone who sleeps 3 to a mattress. When you get back to the building, the hallway is darker than before. The bulb that usually flickers overhead has gone cold, and someone's left a boot halfway down the steps. You step over it, careful not to trip. Your key sticks in the lock again, and for a moment you think the door won't open, but then it gives way with a wooden sigh. Inside, the room smells like boiled potatoes and soap. Someone must have done laundry or tried to. There's a line of damp clothes hanging from the far corner of the room, dripping steadily into a bucket that's already half full. Your mother looks up from her seat near the window. She sees the bread in your hands and nods. You place it on the table and tear it into 5 rough pieces without being told. There's no butter, no jam, not even a pinch of salt. But it's warm, and it's food, and your siblings eat it like it's something more. Your father hasn't returned yet. He's probably still walking the streets, looking for someone to hire him for a half day. You think about how his feet must feel by now, soaked and sore, walking for hours in boots that don't quite fit. You wonder if he's had anything to eat. You tear off the smallest piece of your bread and tuck it into a cloth in your coat pocket, just in case. If he comes home empty again, at least there will be something waiting. Your mother would tell you not to do it, that he's a grown man and that you need your strength too. But something inside you resists that logic. He's still your father, and fathers, even worn-down ones, deserve to be fed. The room starts to come alive again. Your sister clears the dishes without being asked, stacking them carefully by the wash basin. Your little brother has found a spool of thread and a matchstick and is trying to make a toy out of it. It won't last, but he's smiling, and that's worth something. The coal in the stove is low. Your mother tries to stretch it, feeding in only the smallest pieces, waiting as long as she dares between scoops. There's a rhythm to it, like holding your breath between waves. You can't burn it too fast. It has to last until tomorrow, maybe the next day too. You sit near the window for a while, watching the street below. Two children are building something out of ice chunks near the curb, their hands red and raw. A man with a thick scarf walks past, then pauses to look up at your building. You wonder what he sees, just another brick box stacked with lives. He lights a cigarette and stands there for a moment, like he's waiting for something. Then he moves on. You watch until he disappears into the fog that always seems to sit at the edge of the block, blurring the boundary between your street and the one beyond. Afternoon settles like a blanket over the room, heavy and slow. The light turns golden at the edges, a trick of the winter sun trying to soften the day before it gives in to dusk. Your mother mends a hole in your brother's shirt, with her fingers close to the needle, eyes squinting against the fading light. You offer to help with the folding, and she smiles just a little, before handing you a pair of socks that don't match. They're still damp, and the wool clings to your skin. You fold them anyway, stack them in a neat pile beside the rest, even though you know someone will knock them over before nightfall. It feels good to make order from something, even if it doesn't last. Later, your father returns. You hear his footsteps before the door opens, heavier than in the morning, but not slow. He steps inside and brushes the cold from his coat, his hands red and stiff. He doesn't speak at first, just nods at your mother, and then sits by the stove. You see the crumbs on his shirt, the way he holds his shoulders a little higher. He must have found work after all. Maybe not much, but something. Your mother sets a bowl in front of him and he eats in silence, chewing each bite as if it's a gift. Your siblings watch him quietly, waiting for the small signal that says everything is okay again. He finishes, wipes his mouth with the back of his hand, and says something low about tomorrow's chances being better. That's all he needs to say. The mood lifts, not high, but enough to breathe a little easier. As the sky darkens and the room fills with that peculiar quiet that follows a long day, you feel your body growing heavy again. Not from sleepiness, not yet, but from the simple act of continuing. Your sister lies beside you on the mattress, head on your arm, eyes already closed. Your brother mumbles something about a dream he had half asleep. The stove ticks as the coal settles. Your father snores softly from the pallet near the door. Your mother folds one last piece of cloth, then sits in her chair by the window, staring out at the city as it dims. You don't speak. You just lie there, letting the weight of the day press you into the mattress, listening to the small sounds of life around you, the sigh of your sister, the shift of your brother's foot, the scratch of a rat somewhere in the wall. And slowly, slowly, the room begins to fade into stillness once more. The night comes earlier than expected, though in truth, it always does this time of year. The window pane has gone from dusky gold to a deep, inky grey without anyone noticing, like a blanket being pulled over the city by slow, invisible hands. The street below your tenement room fades into shadow, shapes blending together, outlines melting. The lamp outside the butcher's flickers twice and then stays on, its weak yellow glow casting just enough light to sketch long, strange shadows up the brick wall. Inside, the day's warmth has ebbed away. The last of the coal in the stove clicks and settles, the soft red of its core flickering against the black as if unsure whether to keep trying. Your mother places another piece inside, carefully, like she's feeding an animal that bites if startled. It catches, slowly. A small bloom of orange that spreads out into the dark, warming nothing in particular, but offering the illusion of comfort. Your siblings are already half asleep, stretched across the bed like tired laundry strung too close together. The blanket has been tucked and untucked too many times to sit right anymore. Corners ride up, feet poke out. Your little brother has stolen more than his share of it again. And your sister keeps shifting in her sleep to try and reclaim her peace without waking him. You watch the slow, strange choreography from the mattress, your head propped on your arm, your other hand resting on your ribs, as if to still your own breath. The room is not quiet, not really, but it is still. The kind of stillness that feels earned, like the hush that settles over a crowded room once everyone's said what needed saying and nothing else remains. You can hear your father breathing deep and slow like the sea, the ticking of the stove, the occasional rustle of a rat in the wall. And beyond it all, the muffled voice of the city, not quite asleep, not quite awake, just turning itself down to a whisper. Your mother's chair creaks as she leans forward to wrap a shawl tighter around her shoulders. She stares out the window, though there's little to see. Just the brick of the building across the way, its windows mostly dark. In one, a single lamp glows like a floating eye. You wonder who lives there. You've never met them. But sometimes, late at night, you catch the shape of someone reading by that light or washing something at a basin. It feels like company in a strange way. A reminder that you're not the only one trying to survive this hour without complaint. The mattress beneath you is lumpy, as always, and every shift you make seems to wake a spring that wasn't there the day before. You're not uncomfortable exactly, just aware. Aware of every inch of yourself and every inch of everyone beside you. Sleep in a room like this is a negotiation. You don't just lie down and drift, you navigate it. You learn the contours of each sibling's sleep. The way one kicks, the way another snores. You memorize their patterns like footsteps on a familiar staircase, not out of affection, but out of necessity. You learn not to take up more than your share, not to turn too fast, not to speak unless spoken to. It's a strange kind of intimacy, born from confinement, wrapped in necessity. And yet, in this tightness, there's also a kind of comfort. You are not alone. You are never alone. Not in this bed, not in this house, not in this life. Your thoughts begin to slow as the air cools, as the hush grows thicker. You wonder if the girl across the hall is asleep yet. The one who always hums when she brushes her hair. You've never spoken more than a few words to her, just passing greetings, half smiles. But sometimes, late at night, you think about the sound of her voice and how it carries through the wall, soft and clear like something wrapped in gauze. You like the sound. It's not romantic, not really. You're too tired most days to imagine anything beyond the next meal or the next pair of mended shoes. but her voice lingers in your head when the world grows quiet, like a candle someone forgot to snuff out. Your mother rises at last and crosses the room, her steps careful to avoid every board that moans underfoot. She lowers herself onto the pallet beside your father, folding herself into the space she's carved out over years of repetition. They don't speak. They rarely do at night. But you see her hand reach for his, her fingers sliding over his knuckles, resting there. It's not tenderness exactly. It's something older, something more weathered, like two tree roots that have grown around each other over time, inseparable not because they cling, but because they've forgotten how not to. Sleep comes differently tonight. Slower, more tentative. Your limbs ache a little more than usual, maybe from the cold, maybe from nothing at all. You close your eyes and listen to the rhythm of the room, the slow breaths, the sighs, the creaks, the murmurs of dreaming children. You think about the bread you brought home, how quickly it vanished, how grateful everyone was without ever saying so. You think about your father's face when he walked in, the way the lines around his eyes deepened when he saw your mother waiting with a bowl in her hands. You think about the coal, the dwindling stack near the stove, and how far it still needs to stretch before more money comes in. You think about the city and how it never seems to run out of cold, of hunger, of people. But even in all that thinking, your body begins to let go. The mattress may be thin, but it holds you. The blanket may be scratchy, but it wraps around you just enough. And the sounds around you, though far from silence, begin to blur into one long, soft hum. You breathe in the smell of old fabric and warm bodies and coal smoke, and it fills your lungs like something remembered rather than resisted. You shift once, slowly, until your shoulder settles against your sister's. She stirs for a moment, then relaxes her head, bumping gently into yours, and just like that, the last corner of the day folds in on itself. The darkness deepens, not ominous, but steady. The kind that says nothing else needs doing tonight, nothing else needs fixing. The world is still broken in all the usual ways, but it can wait. For now, there is this room, this breath, this moment of stillness between waking and dreaming. And in that small pocket of quiet, you begin to drift. There's something different about the way the light creeps in today. It isn't brighter or faster, not exactly, but it feels softer, like the sky's taken pity on those still curled in sleep and has decided not to rush. It enters through the smeared glass in thin slivers, glinting across the cracked basin, stretching long across the floorboards, brushing the hems of the blankets with a gentle nudge. It finds your face where you lie, tucked against your sister's shoulder, and you squint before your eyes fully open. The mattress beneath you groans quietly, but no one stirs at the sound. For a moment, you don't move. The warmth of the bed, shared and uneven as it is, holds you in place like the pull of a soft tide. Your mother's not up yet, and that in itself is rare. Usually by this hour she's already at the stove, coaxing the coals back to life, her fingers moving through the motions of mourning as though directed by some force older than habit. But today she sleeps still, one hand tucked beneath her cheek, the shawl pulled close around her shoulders. Her face looks softer like this, almost younger, though the lines don't disappear. They're woven in too deep, carved there by years of worry, of weather, of watching too many children grow hungry before their time. You feel something like guilt flicker in your chest for having woken before her, as if you've interrupted a secret moment she only gets when the world forgets to be demanding. You sit up slowly, careful not to wake your siblings. Their limbs are scattered over the bed like dropped twigs, hair tousled, breaths deep and rhythmic. You move to the basin and splash water on your face. The shock of it biting through the morning haze. The rag nearby is still damp from yesterday. You wring it out and fold it neatly, setting it back with a sense of ritual more than cleanliness. Everything in this room is done with a kind of quiet repetition, not because it makes anything easier, but because it makes things bearable. You pull on your coat, still damp near the cuffs, and tuck your feet into your boots by the door. They've dried stiff, and you have to wiggle your toes a bit before they feel like yours again. The hallway outside the flat is colder than you expected. It smells of mildew and damp wool, and somewhere above you, a baby's cry slices briefly through the morning hush. You step around a small puddle that's formed near the stairs, likely from a leak in the roof that no one has gotten around to fixing. No one ever really fixes things in this building. They patch, they prop up, they endure. You think about the landlord's promises from last winter. New plaster, better pipes, a stove that wouldn't smoke. None of it came. Promises, like heat, are fleeting here. Down on the street, the vendors are just setting up their stalls, the air alive with the rustle of canvas and the metallic rattle of cartwheels over cobblestone. A woman, in a green shawl, calls out the price of her eggs in a voice so loud it startles a pair of pigeons into flight. A boy not much older than you balances a basket of apples on his head, weaving through the crowd with a grace born of necessity. You slip into the rhythm of the morning easily, feet finding familiar cracks, eyes scanning the sidewalks for familiar faces. You're not here for anything in particular, just walking, stretching your legs, stealing a moment of space before the day fills back up with needs. The bakery hasn't opened yet, but the smell of bread is already thick in the air, curling from the chimney in steady wisps. You pause near the lamppost across the street and breathe it in. It reminds you of warmth, of fullness, of something just out of reach. You lean there for a while, letting your thoughts wander. They drift to your father's face last night, that weary half-smile he wore when he laid down, the way he looked at your mother without needing words. They drift to the girl across the hall, the one with the humming voice, and you wonder if she's awake yet, if she ever watches the street from behind her curtain like you do. By the time you return, the tenement is fully awake. The stairs are busy now, the air thick with steam and voices. Someone on the second floor is arguing about laundry times again, their voice rising and falling like a saw. You nod to Mrs. Bloom as she passes with her basket of linens, her back bent so low you wonder how she still walks upright at all. Inside your flat, your mother is up, stoking the stove with short, efficient movements. The children are half-dressed, hair sticking up in odd directions, eyes still glazed with sleep. Your sister hums under her breath as she buttons her coat. The baby, wrapped in blankets on the pallet, watches the flurry with wide, unblinking eyes. You hand your mother the small bundle of carrots you managed to get from a vendor's cart, slightly wilted but still edible. She doesn't ask how you paid for them, only nods and takes them with hands that are already busy with something else. She always seems to be doing three things at once, her movements overlapping like the folds in her apron. She slices the carrots thin, adding them to the pot that bubbles faintly on the stove, and the room starts to fill with a scent that isn't quite comforting, but at least familiar. Your father comes in soon after, a dusting of soot on his collar, his breath curling in the cold behind him. He pulls off his gloves, blows into his hands and kisses your mother's temple before sitting at the table. She hands him a cup without speaking, and he drinks it slowly, his eyes scanning the room like he's counting heads, checking for something only he understands. He eats his portion quickly, then rises again, already preparing to leave. There's a shift in the air whenever he does this, a tightening. Everyone becomes a little quieter, a little more alert. He pats your shoulder as he passes, a gesture that means everything and nothing at once, and then he's gone. The rest of the day unspools in pieces. Your sister practices her letters in the corner, her brow furrowed, tongue poking out as she tries to remember how the G curves. Your brother builds towers from tin cups and scraps of wood, toppling them just to build them again. Your mother scrubs the floor with vinegar and water, her knees wrapped in rags, humming an old tune you haven't heard in a while. You sit by the window again, watching the sun creep along the wall, its warmth barely reaching your fingers. You don't mind. It gives you something to measure the hours by. Later, when the sky begins to turn, you're sent to fetch more water. The pump down the alley is rusted and stiff, the handle sticky with something that never quite washes off. You brace your weight and pull until the water gushes out in a rush, splashing your boots. The bucket fills slowly, the sound echoing in the narrow space like a forgotten song. On the way back, you pass a group of boys laughing near the stoop. One of them throws a stone that misses your head by inches. They don't say anything, just watch you walk past, with expressions that hover between curiosity and cruelty. You don't stop, you don't look back, you know better. Evening comes again, slowly and without ceremony. The lamp is lit, the bowls are filled, the children settle. The blanket is pulled up and tugged down and readjusted until everyone has a piece. Your mother mends another shirt, her fingers moving steadily in the dim light. Your father returns, quieter than usual, his eyes shadowed with something unsaid. He doesn't eat much. He sits for a while, then lies down, one arm across his eyes. No one asks questions. Some days end without conclusions, just a slow slide into night. As you lie down once more, the room feels smaller than it did in the morning. Not cramped, exactly, but full in a way that leaves no room for pretense. You feel every breath, every shift of the mattress, every whisper from the walls. And yet even in that closeness, there is a peace to it, a sense of place, of presence. The world outside may be cold, may be cruel, but in here, beneath the sagging ceiling and beside the stove's last glow, you are held. By the time morning unspools itself across the slats of the window once more, the room has already started to rustle with that quiet kind of energy that comes not from rest, but from habit. No one wakes with ease in a place like this. You surface from sleep the way you might rise from a thick, slow river, limbs weighted, thoughts muddy. The first sensation is cold, the second is the ache in your hip from where you slept against the uneven seam of the mattress. You shift carefully, brushing your sister's arm from across your ribs. She stirs, groans softly, and tucks herself deeper into the blanket without opening her eyes. It's your brother who rises first this time, a rare reversal. He sits up with a muffled grunt, hair sticking in all directions, blinking at the watery light, as if surprised by its presence. The stove hasn't been fed yet, and the room carries a crispness that stings the tips of your fingers as you pull your coat tighter. Your breath fogs slightly as you cross to the window, wiping away a corner of the condensation with your sleeve. Outside, the street is still mostly quiet, save for a few early carts creaking past. A woman in a heavy shawl sweeps her stoop with slow, rhythmic strokes, her breath rising in clouds. You can't see her face from here, but you know the movement by heart. Everyone in this neighborhood begins their day in pieces, little rituals patched together in the silence before the shouting starts. Behind you, your mother coughs softly as she rises from the pallet. She moves stiffly today. You notice it as she pulls the shawl over her shoulders, her mouth tightening with each step. She doesn't say anything about the ache, not out loud. She rarely does, and none of you ask. pain, like hunger, is acknowledged more by its silences than its presence. Still, you offer her the cleanest rag you can find, warmed slightly from where it rested near the stove's edge. She takes it with a small nod, presses it to her wrist as she reaches for the kettle. Water goes in first, then the few thin slices of carrot left from yesterday, and finally a handful of rice if there is any. You don't look closely. The meal is always enough because it must be. Your father hasn't come back yet. He left before dawn again, his boots scuffing the floor as he stepped over your sleeping forms, coat buttoned tight, hat pulled low. Some mornings you hear the door click shut behind him and drift back into sleep before the sound fades. Other times you lie awake afterward, tracing the dark ceiling with your eyes, wondering if today will be a lucky day, if the factory foreman might nod at him, if the man at the docks might call his name, if anyone at all might notice the way his shoulders square themselves like a question that dares an answer. The stove starts to catch thin orange lines curling beneath the black iron door, and the scent of warming rice begins to drift through the room. It isn't much, but it's something, and that's all it needs to be. Your sister finally rises, stretching like a cat, her toes peeking out from the edge of her hem. She mumbles a greeting and starts combing her fingers through her hair, pulling it into two rough braids without looking in the mirror. Your brother is already digging for his boots, grumbling about how one always goes missing. You hand him the wayward one from under the bench and he gives you a crooked grin in thanks before tugging them on with more force than necessary. The sun has found its way into the room fully now, turning everything a shade paler. Dust floats in the beams, slow and lazy, dancing just above the floorboards. It makes the cracks in the wall look less severe somehow, the threadbare curtains more like something chosen than endured. There's a strange kind of beauty to the way the light falls across your mother's face as she stands by the stove, back slightly hunched, hands wrapped around a spoon that's seen better days. You watch her in that moment and realize you don't remember the last time you saw her still. She's always in motion, always folded into the next task, always chasing the future with hands full of now. And even now, when the room is still, she's stirring. Breakfast is small again. A few spoonfuls of rice for each of you, made thinner with water, bulked with memory. No one complains. You chew slowly, letting the warmth fill the corners of your mouth, your chest. It's not about taste, it's about heat, about the simple relief of something hot against the cold. Your mother eats last, standing. Your father still hasn't returned. You wonder if he found work and stayed, or if he didn't and wandered instead, letting the cold numb the disappointment for a while. The baby fusses from the pallet and your sister scoops him up, bouncing gently while humming something low and tuneless. She's good with him, always has been. He stops crying almost immediately, tucks his face into her shoulder and falls quiet. You smile at her, and she returns it, small and quick. There's not much time for softness in this room, but it slips in where it can. After the meal, you help your mother with the laundry. The water is cold, your fingers stinging as you scrub the fabric against the board. Shirts, socks, a few underthings. The soap is almost gone and you're careful with how much you use. The scent rises in sharp, clean bursts, mingling with the dampness in the air. You rinse each item twice and hang them near the window on the line, strung across the room. Drips fall steadily into the basin below. Your mother wrings out a final shirt and hands it to you. Her hands are red and raw, knuckles cracked from the cold and the water and the years. By mid-morning, the room is filled with the sound of quiet busyness. Your siblings reading or playing quietly with the few toys they have. Your mother tidying, always tidying, her movements small but constant. You fetch a bucket of water from the pump and carry it back without spilling a drop. The handle cuts into your fingers, but you don't complain. The rhythm of the work keeps your thoughts in line. It's when things slow down that your mind begins to wander too far, wondering about things you can't change, things you can't have. You think about the shop windows you passed the other day, the ones with shoes lined up like soldiers, polished to a shine so bright it almost hurt to look. You imagine what it would be like to own something new, something just for you. Not handed down, not patched. Something that fit without pinching or slipping. You imagine the weight of those shoes on your feet, the sound they'd make on a clean floor. You wonder what kind of person you'd become wearing them. Taller, maybe? Braver? Someone who walks into rooms without flinching. But the day doesn't wait for dreams. There's more laundry, more dishes. A neighbor who needs help lifting something up the stairs. A crying child in the hallway whose mother hasn't returned yet. The world here is full of small needs, and you learn to meet them not because you must, but because they're yours. You belong to this place in the way a crack belongs to a wall, not planned, but inevitable. When your father finally returns, it's almost evening. He's walking slower, but there's a loaf under his arm, and that means something. He sets it on the table without ceremony, and your mother cuts it evenly. There's even a sliver of butter left from last week, and she spreads it thin across each piece. The room feels warmer just from the smell of it. You eat quietly, chewing each bite with a kind of reverence. It tastes like something remembered, like a version of home that existed before you were old enough to know better. Night comes again. The baby is asleep. Your siblings are curled up. Your mother darns a sock by the stove. Your father reads a newspaper someone left on a bench. You lie back, eyes tracing the ceiling, listening to the low hum of the city beyond the window. The world feels distant in this moment, softened by sleep and shadow. And as your body sinks back into the mattress, the last of the day fades like dust in the window light. There are sounds you begin to recognize, not by choice, but through the slow repetition of living near them. The hinge that groans each time the hallway door is opened too far. The soft clink of your father setting down his tin cup just slightly too hard from the stiffness in his hands. The way your sister mutters in her sleep, not quite words, just a stream of half-thoughts wrapped in breath. These sounds become a second language, one that only makes sense in the dark under a low ceiling beside the same four bodies night after night. You've stopped thinking of them as noise. They are the soundtrack of this narrow life. They fill the gaps between your thoughts. And on quiet nights like this, they are the only things keeping you from drifting too far away. You lie still on the mattress, shoulder pressed against the wall, your eyes fixed on a thin crack that runs from the corner of the ceiling down toward the floor. It's always been there, that crack. You used to trace it with your finger when you were smaller, convinced it would someday split wide and reveal something more. Sky maybe, or secrets. Now it's just one more line in the patchwork of this room. Your mother stuffed old rags into the biggest draft hole last winter, and they're still there, faded and stiff with soot. Above the door, a patch of plaster has begun to curl, a slow shedding of the building's skin. You've come to know every flaw in these walls. You could close your eyes and name each dent, each nail, each stain left by long-forgotten spills or careless hands. This room, for all its tightness and ache, has become a kind of map you carry in your body. The night has settled in full now, pressing gently on the glass of the windows, thick with the breath of the city. You can hear the creak of the floorboards from the apartment above. The old man who lives there walks with a cane, and each step carries its own rhythm. Drag, tap, drag, tap. You imagine him pacing again, as he always does when sleep won't come. Your mother once said he'd been a violinist before his fingers curled in on themselves. He still hums sometimes, and when the building is quiet enough, you can hear the ghost of his old melodies trailing through the pipes. Tonight, he hums a slow, unfamiliar tune, low and scratchy, like a lullaby worn thin from overuse. Your little brother's hand is resting on your forearm. He's fallen asleep with his fingers curled loosely, the way a baby holds on without thinking. You remember when he used to cry at night, loud and panicked, his small body trembling from dreams he couldn't explain. Back then, you'd lie awake with him, singing whatever songs you could remember, whispering stories into his hair until his breath evened out. He doesn't cry anymore, not because the dreams have stopped, but because he's learned, like the rest of you, to hold them quietly. In the corner, your father's snoring has become deeper, more regular. It's a comforting sound now, though it didn't always used to be. When you were younger, you thought it meant something was wrong, that his body was groaning under some invisible weight. But now you recognize it for what it is. Proof that he's here, that his chest rises and falls, that the world has not yet taken him too far. Your mother's breath is quieter, almost silent. She curls herself around the baby, her shawl drawn up to her chin, her hand resting on his back like a tether. You shift slowly, the mattress sighing beneath your weight. You're careful not to disturb anyone, though in truth, they're so used to your movements now that they hardly notice. You close your eyes again and try to picture something outside this room, a field maybe, or a porch with a chair that doesn't creak, a place where the air smells of pine and the wind has no scent of ash. But even in your dreams, it's hard to escape the shape of this room. It wraps around you like fabric, worn and heavy. The next thing you know, the light has changed. Morning again, soft and tentative. No rooster crows here, no burst of golden beams. Just a slow greying of the corners, a thin light that creeps like a secret. The room is still full of breath, the kind that lingers after sleep, has loosened its grip but hasn't fully let go. You rise slowly, shoulders stiff, legs slow to follow. Your mother is already at the stove again, her motions slower than usual today. You wonder if her back aches or if she didn't sleep well. She doesn't say, she just moves with the grace of someone who doesn't believe in the luxury of rest. Breakfast is quieter than usual. The rice is thinner, stretched with extra water. Your father eats quickly and leaves without a word. He pauses at the door, adjusts his coat, and pulls his hat low. His eyes meet yours for a heartbeat, then shift away. That's all. He's out into the street before anyone can ask where he's going or what the day might bring. You watch the door long after it shuts, listening for footsteps, for anything to hold on to. But there's only silence. You offer to go to the pump this morning. The bucket is heavier than usual, or maybe your arms are just tired. Either way, the cold bites into your fingers as you carry it back. You pass the same neighbors, the same faces lined with sleep and coal dust. A woman waves from a window, her baby on her hip. She looks tired. You wave back. She disappears inside without a word. Back in the room, your sister is brushing the baby's hair with a bit of ribbon she found. She's singing under her breath, something soft and lilting. Your brother has taken to drawing with charcoal on scraps of brown paper. He's got a knack for it, though no one says so directly. You watch his hands move, confident and quiet. You wonder what he sees when he draws, what the room looks like to him. Your mother hands you a list, scribbled on a torn scrap of newspaper. It's not long. Bread, salt, bit of a lie if there's any left. You nod and pull on your boots. The air outside is sharp today, the kind that makes your teeth ache when you breathe too deeply. The streets are more crowded now. A wagon tips slightly as it rounds the corner, its wheel catching on a rut. A boy runs past you, chased by a dog that barks without malice. You dodge both without thinking. At the market, the bread is half price. The baker's son winks at you, says something about having too much stock. You nod, grateful, and take the extra roll he slips into your sack. On the way back, you spot a scrap of cloth near the alley. It's clean mostly and not torn. You tuck it into your coat. Your mother might be able to sew it into a sleeve patch or turn it into a lining. Nothing is wasted here. Even luck gets repurposed. When you return, the room smells of soap and ash. Your mother is washing the floor, her sleeves rolled high, her hands red. You hand her the bread and the cloth. She takes both with a smile that's more in her eyes than her mouth. Your sister offers to make tea, though there's no real tea left. Just herbs boiled in water, but no one minds. The day passes, quiet, repetitive, like a wheel turning slowly. The sounds return, the hinges, the cup, the muttering. Each one a thread in the fabric of this life. Each one a reminder that, for now at least, the world is still turning in your direction. And when the sun fades again, when the city tucks itself back into its shadows and the room fills once more with shared breath and slow silence, you lie back on the mattress, your head on the same pillow, your feet brushing your sister's. You stare at the same crack in the ceiling and think, not of escape, but of endurance. Of all the things that hold, even when they shouldn't. The light that trickled into the room the next morning was pale and strained, as though the sky itself had trouble waking. You rose before your siblings, more out of habit than urgency, your body already moving before your mind caught up. The room still held that deep hush, that echo of sleep just lifted, when nothing felt entirely real. You slid your legs from the mattress and pressed your feet into your boots, stiff from the cold and from the damp that never quite dried. The floor, always uneven, creaked beneath you in a familiar rhythm, each step rehearsed and careful, the choreography of not waking the house. Your mother was at the stove again, quiet and focused. The light cast her in silhouette, her figure outlined against the flicker of the fire inside. She turned just enough to acknowledge you, not with words, but with the kind of nod that meant she had already seen you moving, already heard your breath shift as you woke. In her world, nothing went unnoticed. She poured the last of the water into a dented pot and added what little rice was left, stirring slowly, the spoon tracing a wide circle like she was drawing the day into being. You sat near the window while the rest of the house stirred. Your sister mumbled in her sleep, face tucked into the blanket, while your brother, ever restless, kicked off the cover and rolled into your side of the bed without waking. You pulled the blanket back over him gently. The baby made a small sound, not quite a cry, more of a questioning grunt, and your mother answered it with a quiet hum as she continued cooking. The room smelled faintly of soap, of iron, of something burnt and old. Outside, the city was already coughing itself awake, the sounds of hooves and boots and morning bells folding into one another. You were sent for soap today, and maybe onions if the man on the corner had any for cheap. Your mother handed you the coin with a look that was part apology, part trust. You slipped it into your coat pocket and headed down the stairwell, the air in the hallway thick with the scent of boiled laundry and something sour that had settled near the ceiling like fog. You passed Mrs. Callahan on the second-floor landing, her apron dusted with flour, her hair pulled into a haphazard knot. She gave you a tired smile and stepped aside, her large frame barely clearing the way. You nodded and moved on. The street outside was awash with colour, not the kind that sang, but the kind that lingered like bruises, grey skies, brown coats, red faces chafed raw by the wind. Vendors were already shouting their prices, their hands gesturing wildly over baskets of wrinkled produce. You knew most of them by sight now. The old man with the wool cap who sold onions from crates he claimed came from his cousin's farm upstate. The boy who offered peppermints 3 for a penny, his fingers too thin for the gloves he wore. You made your way to the soap cellar first, trading the coin for a small wrapped cake that smelled faintly of lavender, though it was likely only scented lye. Still, the weight of it in your pocket felt solid and real. On your way back, you paused by the alley that ran between the baker's shop and the grocer's. It was narrow and littered with broken crates and slush, but at its end stood a woman you hadn't seen before. She was older, with hair tucked under a worn scarf, her coat buttoned to the throat. She held a small bundle in her arms, though whether it was bread or baby, you couldn't tell from where you stood. She met your eyes briefly and offered a nod. You returned it before continuing, the moment folding itself into the morning, like a note pressed between pages. Back in the room, your siblings were up and pulling on layers, their chatter soft and full of yawns. Your mother took the soap without comment and set it beside the basin. The rice was finished and portioned out carefully, each bowl warmed by the fire but still thin and stretched. You ate without talking, spoons scraping gently against metal, the rhythm of the meal broken only by the baby's hiccup and the occasional thud of someone moving about in the apartment above. Your father didn't return until near midday, his coat damp and shoulders slumped. He carried a small parcel of nails and a heel of bread, which your mother took and set aside without question. He didn't speak much, just sat for a while, rubbing his hands together by the stove. His fingers looked darker than usual, stained with something from the work or the walk. You handed him a clean cloth without being asked, and he nodded, offering the faintest trace of a smile before wiping his palms. That afternoon passed slowly, the kind of slow that isn't peaceful but heavy. Your sister tried to teach your brother a rhyme she'd heard from the neighbor girl, clapping her hands in rhythm while he tried to follow. The baby fussed, unsettled by something no one could name. Your mother scrubbed the floor again, harder this time, her movements tighter, more clipped. You offered to help, and she passed you the brush with a grateful look. You worked in tandem, side by side, the smell of soap rising in waves. There was something almost satisfying in the way the dirt lifted from the cracks, in how the rag left streaks of clean wood behind it. Later, your father took your brother to mend something down the hall, and the room was quiet for the first time in hours. Your mother sat by the window, staring out with a look that didn't quite reach the street. You sat across from her, watching her watch nothing, the silence stretching between you like a thread not yet pulled. After a while, she spoke, her voice low and steady. She told you about her mother who used to sew lace so fine it could slip through a ring. She told you how she'd watched her fingers move like they were dancing, how the thread would catch the light like spider silk. You listened, not because you knew what to say, but because her voice was soft in a way you didn't often hear, and it felt like something precious. Evening crept in with little warning. The sky outside had turned the color of old pewter, and the lamp on the corner flickered to life with a weak sputter. You helped bring in the laundry, the damp edges stiff with cold. Your sister folded each piece carefully, stacking them in neat piles beside the stove. The baby had finally fallen asleep, curled tight against your mother's side. Your father and brother returned, smelling of sawdust and smoke, their coats coated in fine grit. Supper was thin again, but there was butter, just a little, enough to spread on a crust and make it taste like memory. That night, as you lay back down, the mattress felt softer somehow, though nothing had changed. You listened to the sounds of the room, the quiet breathing, the occasional shift of limbs, the soft ticking of the stove as the last of the coals settled. Outside, the city was quieter than usual, the snow beginning to fall in fine, steady flakes. You could just make out the shape of it through the window, lit by the lamplight, each flake catching the glow like ash falling upward. You watched until your eyes could hold no more, and then you let the weight of the day pull you back into sleep. Your hand resting on your brother's arm, your sister's hair brushing your cheek, the sound of your mother's breath, a soft rhythm in the dark. The morning after the snow came was different, not just in temperature or light, but in the way everything sounded. It was quieter, as if the city had exhaled during the night and forgotten to pull breath back in. Even the usual sounds that crept through the thin walls and splintered floors, boots on stairs, the groan of the neighbor's bed frame, the first pot clanging onto the stove, seemed softened, muffled beneath a thick hush. You lay there for a while, eyes barely open, watching your breath rise like smoke from your lips. The window had fogged with a delicate film of frost, its edges feathered like lace. You could see the pattern where a fingertip had traced a path in the night, perhaps your brother's or maybe your own, done half asleep, half dreaming. The blanket over you had grown colder in the night, stiff near the corners where a draft had crept in. Your sister's elbow had found its way beneath your ribs again, and your younger brother's legs were draped carelessly over yours, heavy with sleep and the confidence that comes from knowing you'll never be alone in this bed. You shifted carefully, not wanting to wake them, and turned your head toward the window where the morning light began to pool like pale ink. The sky outside was white and wide, the snow making everything look smoother, cleaner, as if the filth and soot of the city had been scrubbed away for once. You knew it wouldn't last. By midday, the snow would turn to grey slush beneath wagon wheels and boots, but for now, it was still beautiful. Your mother was already up, as always, but today she was quieter too, moving slowly between stove and basin, her shawl wrapped tight. Her hands rubbed together as she waited for the water to heat, the kettle making that familiar low whistle that meant it was close but not ready. She turned when she heard you stir and gave a nod, not a smile but something like it. Her face looked tired this morning, more lined than usual, but there was warmth in her eyes that cut through the chill. She pointed toward the bundle on the chair. "New socks," she said, mended ones, still warm from the fire. You pulled them on gratefully, the wool scratchy but better than bare feet on the cracked floor. The baby had not stirred yet, bundled tight on the pallet, with just the round of his cheek visible beneath the blankets. Your sister would tend to him soon, her rhythm as practiced as your mother's by now. You rose slowly, stretching the stiffness from your arms, and stepped across the room to help with the fire. The coals were stubborn today, reluctant in the cold, but eventually, with enough breath and patience, they caught. A soft orange glow began to bloom, not enough to warm the room completely, but enough to stop the bite in the air from settling too deep into your bones. Breakfast was thin but hot, oats with water and a spoon of sugar scraped from the bottom of the tin. It was the last of it, and you each got only a little, but the warmth in your mouth was enough. Your brother held his tin bowl close to his chest after eating, as if the ghost of heat might linger there a little longer. Your father wasn't home yet. He had left before the snow began, before the sky turned, and no one knew yet where he had gone, or whether he would come back with work, or only silence. Your mother said nothing of it, but you saw her glance at the door more than once as she moved around the room. By mid-morning, the snow was still falling, slower now, more like ash than flakes. The rooftops were blanketed white, and the smoke from chimneys looked almost clean against it. You bundled up and went out anyway. The pump was stiff from the cold, its handle covered in ice. It took effort to coax the water out, the metal biting your fingers through your gloves. But eventually the water came, and you filled your bucket and made your way back through streets that had gone strangely quiet. Children played in small clusters, throwing handfuls of snow that scattered like dust, their laughter ringing brighter than usual. A wagon trundled past, its wheels dragging snow with it, leaving deep tracks that would freeze before long. Inside again, the warmth felt like a reward, though it was only marginally warmer than what lay beyond the door. Your mother had cleared a space near the window where the sun had finally managed to push through. She set the laundry there to catch some of the light. The shirts and rags hung like ghosts from the line, gently swaying when the wind crept through the cracks. You joined her, wringing out another cloth, your fingers red and sore. She didn't speak, but she reached across and touched your wrist briefly. Just a moment, just long enough to remind you that she saw you. The baby stirred after noon, and your sister scooped him up, whispering nonsense into his ear as she rocked him back and forth. He fussed a bit, then settled, lulled by her voice and the familiar rhythm of her arms. You watched them from your place near the stove, wondering when your sister had gotten so good at this, when she had become something more than a child in the same cramped bed. She hummed as she moved, the same old tune she always did, and it filled the room with something soft, something better than silence. Your father returned just before dusk, his boots wet and shoulders heavy with the weight of the snow and whatever the day had brought. He didn't speak right away, just shook the snow from his coat and stood near the fire, letting the heat chase the sting from his fingers. He handed your mother a wrapped bundle, a bit of bread, a tin of beans, and, strangest of all, a candle. Your mother's eyes softened when she saw it, and she lit it without waiting for dark to fall. The flame was small and unsteady, but it changed the room somehow, gave it a heart to beat around. Supper was quiet, not for lack of food, but from the kind of weariness that settles in the bones after a day that gives too little. Still you ate. You shared the bread. You passed the tin. The baby laughed once, mouth covered in crumbs, and for a moment everyone smiled, even your father, even your mother, who touched his hand beneath the table and didn't let go. When night came fully, it felt heavier than usual. The snow still whispered against the window pane, and the wind moaned low through the cracks. You all gathered closer to the stove, drawn by the candle's glow and the last of the heat. Your brother showed a drawing he'd made with charcoal on brown paper. A picture of the room as it was, everyone just as they had been. It was rough and smudged, but you recognized each face, each shape, even the candlelight drawn as a single bright stroke. Your father ruffled his hair. Your mother kissed his head. The drawing was tucked behind the basin, out of reach of the baby's fingers. You lay down together as always, limbs tangled, quilt stretched. The candle flickered on the shelf, casting slow shadows that danced along the ceiling. You could hear the creak of the rafters, the wind pressing against the walls, the slow breathing of your family all around you. You closed your eyes and listened, not to fall asleep quickly, but to linger in the moment, to press it into your memory like the smell of soap and firewood and wool. It was a day that asked nothing new of you, and yet it had carved itself into your chest in quiet ways. You felt it there, where your breath softened, where your muscles began to loosen, where the weight of the world hadn't lifted, but had at least paused. And as the candle burned low and your sister's hair brushed your cheek, and your mother's voice hummed something too faint to follow, you slipped once again into the strange comfort of that shared bed, knowing that whatever came tomorrow, this moment would wait for you in the corners of your sleep. The candle burned all the way down by morning, leaving only a small circle of wax on the wooden shelf, pale and hardened, like a memory you could still see but not touch. You were the first to wake again, not from any noise or cold, but from the strange stillness that sometimes wrapped itself around the room like a second blanket. The kind of stillness that doesn't feel peaceful, but watchful. Your eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the faint grey light seeping through the frost-smeared glass. The snow had stopped sometime in the night, but it left behind a quiet that clung to the walls and hovered in the corners. Your siblings hadn't moved much. Your brother's arm lay heavy across your chest, while your sister had burrowed deep into the quilt, only her hair peeking out. The baby stirred in his sleep, his tiny fists pressed beneath his chin like he was holding on to something in a dream. You stayed like that for a while, not ready to move, not yet ready to step into the chill or the routine. The longer you stayed still, the more you could almost imagine the world beyond the window was soft and forgiving, that outside lay something other than soot and sore feet and empty pots. But eventually your body pulled you upright, driven by need more than will. The stove was cold again. You opened it carefully, brushing out the last of the ash with your sleeve, your breath coming out in small puffs as you worked. The kindling was low, just a handful of sticks and splinters saved from an old crate. You arranged them with the care of someone building a house out of twigs, struck the match, and held your breath until the flame caught. It always felt like a small miracle, that spark in the dark, and you let yourself feel the relief before moving on. Your mother was still asleep. That alone unsettled you more than anything else. She rarely stayed in bed, not even when she was ill. Her world moved through rhythm and repetition, and her absence from the stove or the basin sent a tremble through the order of things. You crossed to her pallet and knelt beside her. Her face was flushed, her lips dry, her breath too shallow. She didn't stir when you said her name, just shifted slightly, murmuring something you couldn't catch. You touched her forehead. It was too warm. The rest of the household began to stir, one by one. Your sister blinked the sleep from her eyes and immediately reached for the baby, pressing her cheek against his hair as she lifted him. Your brother groaned and rolled over, muttering something about the cold. You told them gently about your mother, about the fever, about the heat of her skin. Your sister's eyes widened and she clutched the baby tighter. Your brother stood, all the sleep drained from his face. You boiled water. It was what she always did when someone was ill, so you did it now. You found the last of the clean rags and soaked them, pressing them gently to her forehead, her wrists, her neck. She flinched at the touch, mumbling something about potatoes, about the rain. Your sister offered her a sip of water, held the cup steady, as your mother took a few small swallows and then turned away. The baby whimpered, sensing the change in the air, the shift in mood. You took him for a while, bouncing him gently near the window, whispering nonsense until he settled. The door opened mid-morning and your father entered, stamping snow from his boots. His coat was dusted with frost, his cheeks red from the wind. He saw your mother on the pallet and went still. He didn't ask what had happened. He knelt beside her and took her hand, pressing his forehead against her fingers. Then he stood and started pacing, back and forth, like he could walk the illness away. You told him what you'd done so far. He nodded once, then left again, his boots thudding down the stairs. He returned an hour later with a woman you barely recognized. She lived on the next block, you'd heard. A midwife, or maybe just someone who knew herbs and fevers and when to worry. She had a basket slung over her shoulder and hands that moved quickly. She examined your mother, listened to her breathing, checked her hands, her eyes, her tongue. She spoke quietly with your father, then asked for more hot water, for vinegar, if you had any, for a quiet room. You did your best to provide all three. The day stretched long and thin, like dough rolled too far. You kept the fire going, kept the water hot, kept the baby calm. Your sister stayed near your mother, whispering stories and songs, her small hand smoothing her hair. Your brother sat by the window, drawing quietly, his eyes flicking often to the pallet. The woman stayed most of the afternoon, mixing something in a cracked mug, helping your mother drink, changing the compresses. She finally left when the light started to fade, leaving a small bundle of herbs and a list of instructions scrawled on the back of a receipt. Your father walked her out and didn't come back for a long time. That night, the room was quieter than usual, but not with peace. With worry. With breath held too long. With glances that said more than words. Your mother slept fitfully, tossing beneath the blankets, murmuring names you didn't recognize. You sat up for most of the night, feeding the fire, checking the water, pressing rags to her face. Your sister drifted off eventually, curled beside the baby, while your brother fell asleep in the chair, his sketch pad still clutched in his hands. You didn't sleep, not really, just closed your eyes now and then, listening to her breathing, counting each rise and fall. The candle was gone, but you'd managed to melt the last of the wax into a small pool on the shelf, and the faint smell of it still hung in the air. The room felt smaller somehow, more fragile, like the walls might crumble if you leaned too hard. But you didn't. You stayed steady, you stayed still, you waited. And as the first pale light of dawn returned, your mother's breath grew deeper, more even. Her skin felt less hot beneath your touch. She opened her eyes just a little and looked at you. Really looked. Her mouth moved, trying for a word, but no sound came. Still you saw the shape of it, saw what she meant. You nodded and pressed her hand and whispered that everything was all right, that she could sleep now. And she did. The day after your mother opened her eyes was a strange one, not loud or dramatic in any way, just different in the quietest of ways. The kind of difference you'd miss if you weren't paying close attention. But you were. Every movement, every sigh, every blink from her was something you watched like a hawk, as though the illness might sneak back in the moment you turned your head. She was still weak, barely able to sit up without leaning against the wall, but her skin was cooler and her words came in soft pieces now, like dry leaves shaken from a tree, fragile but clear enough. The worst had passed, or at least that's what you all needed to believe. The room had begun to smell like broth again. Your father managed to bring back a bit of bone and carrot, and your sister stewed it slow and careful, stirring with a seriousness far beyond her years. The baby too seemed to understand the weight of the days. He cried less, watched more, clung to your shoulder when you held him with a grip that didn't loosen easily. Your brother had grown quieter. He no longer rushed to the window or asked endless questions. He sat with his drawing pad and sketched the curve of the teacup, the way the sunlight struck the blanket. He didn't say it, but you could tell he was afraid the calm was too thin to trust. You kept the fire going. It had become your task without anyone assigning it. You had a rhythm now, collecting wood scraps, coaxing the embers, checking the draft. There was comfort in it. The repetition, the cause and effect, the way a little patience could make something warm grow from something cold. You sat beside the stove often, warming your hands, watching the flame like it might teach you something about how to keep going when all you had were ashes and hope. Your mother thanked you that morning, just one word whispered, while you helped her sit and sip the broth. Her fingers, dry and thin, clutched the tin cup like it was something holy. She looked at you with eyes that had once been sharper, but now held something softer. Not weakness, but surrender. Not the kind that gives up, but the kind that lets itself be carried. You squeezed her hand gently and said nothing. Words didn't seem to belong in that moment. Only presence, only breath and warmth and the quiet, shared work of being alive. Outside, the snow had begun to melt. Not all at once, but in little ways. The edges of the rooftops were wet, the icicles at the eaves shorter than they had been. You could hear the slow drip of thaw water along the gutters. The city hadn't softened, but it had changed. The street outside was muddier, the air damp with the smell of thaw and smoke. You noticed more people stopping to talk, even if just for a moment. More nods exchanged, more shoulders bumped gently instead of rushed past, as though the weather had reminded everyone briefly that survival wasn't something you did alone. Your father stayed close to home that day. He didn't say why. He shaved in the basin near the window, wiped the steam from the glass with his sleeve, and stood staring out for a long time before dressing again. He tightened the laces on your brother's boots. He mended the hinge on the cupboard door. He ate in silence, but with a kind of presence that was rare for him. And when your mother dozed in the afternoon, he pulled the chair close and sat with her, his hand resting lightly on the blanket near her side. The room stayed dim most of the day. Clouds rolled in, casting long shadows over the floor. The fire gave a flickering light that painted everything in motion. You found yourself staring at the way the flame moved, the dance of it, unpredictable and hypnotic. Your sister sang under her breath again. A lullaby your mother used to sing, now passed down through memory and need. The baby fell asleep on her shoulder, his breath soft and slow. You stepped outside for air after dark fell, just for a moment. The wind was gentler now, brushing against your cheeks instead of biting them. The streets glistened, patches of slush reflecting the dull glow of the lamps. You watched a cat dart between shadows. You heard a door creak open, a voice call someone in. The city was alive, yes, but quieter than usual, as if even it knew something delicate was being held just above breaking. When you returned, the room had dimmed further, the fire low. Your brother asleep near the stove, your sister curled around the baby, and your father seated still beside your mother, eyes closed but not asleep. You crept back to the mattress, curling into the space you always returned to, the one that still held the shape of your body. And you lay there listening, not for danger, not for fear, but for the sound of breath, your mother's, your siblings, your own. The music of persistence, of presence, and as sleep came, it came not quickly or all at once, but gently, like fog rolling in from the sea, soft and thick and slow. It wrapped around your limbs, dulled the ache in your back, softened the weight behind your eyes. And in that half space between awake and gone, you whispered a word, not prayer, not promise, just thanks. Thanks for warmth, for another day, for the space between suffering that still somehow held room for love. It began with a sound you couldn't quite name, somewhere between a groan and a rustle, followed by the subtle shift of weight on the floorboards that always let you know someone was up. You opened your eyes slowly, not startled, but drawn upward by the knowledge that morning had returned. There was a softness to the light, like milk spilled across the room, seeping through the cracks in the window curtain. Your sister had already risen. You could hear her humming low, the tune steady and familiar, one of those songs that seemed passed from mother to daughter without ever being written down. It echoed softly against the corners of the room, weaving around the quiet breath of the baby, still asleep in her arms. Your mother had slept through the night. Her breathing had deepened, less of a struggle. And when you had rolled over in the darkness, you saw the outline of her hand resting against her chest, fingers rising and falling in a steady rhythm. It wasn't strength yet, but it was something you could believe in. She lay there now, still curled beneath the quilt, but with her eyes open, following the shadows on the ceiling, as if tracing the stories that lived there. When she caught your gaze, her lips moved into something near a smile, not quite formed, but full of recognition. You returned it with a nod, one hand reaching for hers under the covers. Her fingers were cool but not trembling, and she gave them a light squeeze before closing her eyes again. The fire had gone out during the night, and the chill was creeping back in. You moved slowly, careful not to wake your brother, who had shifted so his feet rested halfway onto your blanket. Your joints cracked as you stood, muscles tight from sleeping in the same curled position night after night. You crouched near the stove, sorting through the remnants of yesterday's ash, finding a few bits of coal still intact, saving the ones not fully spent. Your breath fogged as you worked, and the scrape of iron and wood was the only sound beyond your sister's humming. The match caught, the flame wavered, then grew. You cupped your hands near it, drawing warmth into your skin, watching the flicker return to life. Outside, the city was stirring. You could hear the muffled clatter of carts rolling over melting ice, the distant call of vendors arranging their wares beneath awnings soaked from thaw. The air smelled of wet stone and wood smoke. When you opened the window, a crack, to let some air in, a thin breeze carried with it the scent of oranges. Not real ones, not the fruit itself, but that sharp tang from the peels tossed into alleyways behind, the grocer's carts mixing with the smell of soot and laundry. It made you ache a little, not for hunger, but for the memory of something sweet, something whole. Your father returned shortly after sunrise. His boots were caked in slush, the hem of his coat dark with melted snow. He entered quietly, brushing off his shoulders, his eyes going first to the pallet where your mother lay. She lifted her hand just slightly, and he crossed to her, touching her forehead gently with the back of his fingers. He did not speak, but his face softened as though he had been holding a breath too long and had finally let it go. Then he turned to you and handed over a parcel, wrapped in oilcloth. Inside were 2 turnips, a small hunk of salted pork, and 3 bruised apples. Your heart caught at the sight of the fruit. It had been months since anything that round and bright had been inside these walls. You looked at him, unsure, and he just said quietly, "It was a good day." You sliced the apples into thin wedges and placed them in a tin bowl on the table like they were porcelain. No one rushed for them. They sat there glowing in the grey morning light, a promise. Your sister passed a wedge to the baby, who chewed it with slow delight, juice running down his chin. Your brother smelled his before biting in, eyes wide with wonder. Your mother took hers with trembling fingers, pressing it to her lips before she ate. You saved yours until last, letting the scent rise, letting it rest on your tongue like a secret. The flavor was tart and soft, and it made something in your chest loosen, as if your ribs had unclenched. The day unfolded gently, full of quiet movements and small acts. You washed your mother's hair with warm water and a cloth, gently parting the strands, careful not to pull. She sighed and closed her eyes, the lines on her forehead easing. Your sister repaired a tear in the baby's nightshirt with small, neat stitches, a needle flashing in the window light. Your brother swept the floor with a broken broom and then helped fold the dry laundry with a precision that bordered on pride. The room never became tidy, not really, but it felt steadier, like a place that might not fall apart just yet. Your father didn't go back out. He sat by the stove for a long while, carving something with his penknife from a bit of wood he'd picked up along the street. He didn't say what it was, but the shape was beginning to look like a bird, its wings open as if it were about to take flight. The baby crawled over to him once, tugging at his sleeve, and your father scooped him up onto his knee, continuing to whittle with the baby nestled against his side. It was not a scene you saw often, and you watched it quietly, storing it away like the last bite of a good meal, something to pull out again when the nights grew colder. By afternoon, the clouds had cleared enough to let through a patch of pale blue sky. It wasn't vibrant, but it was enough to feel the promise of something beyond the snow, something more than coal smoke and frostbitten laundry. You stood by the window for a long while, just looking, breathing in the scent of the warming world. Down below, children had begun to run. Through puddles, their boots splashing in slush, laughter cutting through the air like bright thread through wool. You leaned your forehead against the cold pane of glass, smiling faintly at their joy. Later, your sister sang again, not to the baby this time, but to the room itself. A soft, wordless melody that wrapped around the walls and made them feel less like barriers and more like shelter. Your mother rested with her eyes closed, but her lips moved with the tune, her breath syncing with the rhythm. You watched the fire burn low and then fed it, watched it come back, steadier now with less coaxing. The evening meal was simple but filling. The turnips boiled soft, the pork sliced thin and cooked with a bit of leftover broth. You each ate slowly, chewing not just to fill your stomach, but to hold the moment longer. When night returned, it came quietly, with soft steps and cooler air. You all gathered near the stove again, not from necessity, but from something more like ritual. The baby slept in your mother's arms. Your father leaned back in his chair, the carved bird resting on the table beside him. Your brother curled near the blanket, scribbling something in the dim light. Your sister rested her head on your shoulder, and you rested yours atop hers. The room had not changed, and yet it had. It felt different now, as if it had remembered how to breathe. And as you lay back down on the mattress, limbs tucked close, warmth shared among bodies, you felt sleep coming not as escape, but as return, as home. Your eyes fluttered shut with the quiet knowing that tomorrow would still be hard, that wood would still need to be gathered, that the broth would thin again, that your father might come home empty-handed one day soon. But tonight the fire was strong, the apple had been sweet, your mother had opened her eyes. And somewhere beyond the window, a patch of sky waited, blue and wide and silent. When you woke the next morning, the light had a different feel to it, not just brighter, but fuller somehow, as if it had come not only to fill the room, but to press gently against the weight of the days before. It came through the window in long slants, dust floating visibly in its path, turning the air golden where it had so often been grey. You stretched slowly, your body sore, but not from unrest, just from the simple act of living. Your sister was already awake, braiding her hair near the basin, humming that same threadbare tune that had carried your mother through the fever days. The baby had begun to stir, his small noises soft and curious, and the quiet was not oppressive, but calm, like the pause between verses in a song that has not yet ended. Your mother sat up before you did. She hadn't done that in over a week. She used the edge of the mattress to steady herself, her shoulders trembling with the effort. But she didn't call for help. Her breath came slow but deliberate, and when she caught your gaze, she gave the smallest nod, her eyes clear in a way they hadn't been in days. She looked worn thin, like paper folded and unfolded too many times, but she looked back at you, really looked. And you felt something shift inside, something small and quiet, but rooted. The kind of shift that stays. Your father had already gone, but he had left a note, if you could call it that. A piece of old ledger paper with a pencil mark down the center, and a small drawing in the corner. Not words, not instructions, just a sketch of a bowl, with steam rising from it, and the initials M underneath. It was enough. You tucked it into the edge of the shelf above the stove, where your sister would see it later. It meant he'd be back before supper. It meant he'd try. The fire had held through the night this time, just enough coals to coax a new flame without much effort. You fed it a few slivers of kindling and crouched beside it, listening to the crackle as it took hold. There was something satisfying about the sound, like a whisper that things would keep going, even if slowly. You filled the kettle and set it on the stove, then sat for a moment, just letting the warmth seep into your knees. Breakfast was a quiet affair. A heel of bread, soaked in broth, shared and warm. Your brother sketched a spoon in his notebook, tongue sticking out in concentration. Your sister fed the baby mashed turnip from her own fingers. Your mother leaned back against the wall, wrapped in 2 shawls, watching. She didn't speak much, but when she did, her voice had returned to its usual pitch, even if not its strength. She asked if there were potatoes. You told her no, but there was a plan to try for some at the market if the neighbor's boy came through with the coal money he owed. She nodded like that was enough. Later that morning, you scrubbed the floor again, not because it was especially dirty, though it never truly felt clean, but because something about the rhythm of the task calmed you. The way the rag pushed and pulled, the cold sting of the water, the slow progress from one end of the room to the other. Your sister swept ahead of you, making space, lifting the baby each time he tried to crawl into your work. Your mother dozed through it all, her breath shallow but even. And the room, in its clutter and tightness, felt strangely open, like a place that breathed with you. That afternoon brought a strange burst of noise, a knock at the door, unexpected and sharp. You stood first, smoothing your shirt without thinking, your fingers suddenly self-conscious of their stains. It was Mrs. Green from 2 floors down, her face flushed from the stairs, her basket hanging from her arm. She stepped inside with only a glance for permission and placed a tin box on the table. Said it was leftovers from the church gathering. Said she remembered your mother being sick. Said she hoped the bread wasn't too stale. Then she turned and left before you could do more than nod. Your sister opened the box slowly, as if expecting it to vanish. Inside were 3 biscuits, hard but whole, and a folded cloth holding dried apples. You divided them with reverence. Your mother ate half of one slowly, chewing each bite like it needed to be memorized. Your brother devoured his, crumbs catching in his collar. The baby gnawed on a dried apple until it turned soft in his hands. You saved your peace, not because you weren't hungry, but because holding it in your palm felt like holding the day itself. A small, improbable kindness. Your father returned near sunset, as promised, with a bundle beneath his arm and a smile that crept slowly across his face when he saw your mother sitting up. He kissed her forehead, and she closed her eyes, leaning into it like it was warmth itself. He gave you the bundle without explanation, and you opened it to find 3 bars of soap, rough and unwrapped, and a packet of sewing needles tucked into a scrap of cloth. You didn't ask how he'd come by them. You simply thanked him and put them in the drawer by the basin, the one your mother always said was for special things. That evening, you all ate together, if not at a table, then at least within the same circle of firelight. Your mother even held the baby for a while, her hands still unsteady but her smile more sure. Your father talked softly about a man who might need help loading crates down at the docks, about a neighbor who owed him half a sack of flour. Your sister listened with her knees tucked to her chest, your brother drawing ships with broad lines and heavy strokes. As the light faded, your mother asked for a story. You hadn't told one in weeks, not since before the fever. You hesitated, not because you didn't want to, but because your voice felt fragile somehow, like it had forgotten how to stretch that far. But your sister nudged you, and your brother looked up expectantly, and so you began. A simple tale, one you'd told a dozen times before, about a clever fox and a sleeping bear, about a trick gone wrong and a forest that never told secrets. Your mother smiled at the familiar parts. Your sister mouthed the ending before you said it. Your father laughed once, low and quiet, and the baby clapped at the sound without knowing why. When the story ended, the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was warm, full of breath and memory. You lay down on the mattress once more, your sister curling beside you, your brother at your feet, the baby resting between your parents. And the room, small and worn and patched with quiet sorrows, felt just a little larger that night. Sleep didn't come quickly, but it came. Wrapped in the soft hum of remembered songs, in the steady rhythm of your mother's breathing, in the faint scent of dried apples still lingering in the air. You closed your eyes, the image of the patch of pale sky still fixed behind your eyelids, and let yourself drift. Morning found you slower to rise than usual, not from fatigue, but from something softer, a resistance to letting go of the warmth that had settled into your limbs through the night. The room was still dim, the sun struggling through a veil of overcast sky, but there was a gentleness in the air that hadn't been there before. It was the kind of morning when nothing creaked too loudly, where the kettle didn't hiss in protest, where the sound of breath and the rustle of blankets blended into something resembling peace. You opened your eyes to find the baby already awake beside you, chewing on a frayed bit of quilt, his eyes wide and full of that strange, alert wonder that only children seem to possess. He made no noise, just watched you, as if he were trying to figure out what kind of day it might be. Your sister had already slipped out from under the covers and was kneeling beside your mother, helping her braid her hair. It was a slow process, made slower by the occasional pause to adjust the blanket around her shoulders or to let her rest. But your mother was upright again, and her hair, which had gone untended for days, now began to look like itself again. Neat, dark, parted and gathered with a steadiness that matched the slow reweaving of the days. She looked over and smiled at you, tired, but with more strength behind her gaze. That smile stayed with you as you sat up, stretched your arms above your head, and touched your toes to the floor. Your father was gone again, off before dawn most likely, and the place he'd left behind in the corner held only a small box of nails and a strip of cloth he'd used to wrap his tools. It was a habit now, the soundless leaving, the quiet return, and you had grown to appreciate the way it let the rest of the house wake on its own time. Your brother had taken up residence beside the stove, wrapped in the long wool coat your father sometimes let him wear when the wind was bad. He had a tin cup full of water beside him and was already sketching. This time, not the room, but the windowsill where a single beam of light had landed. He was tracing the shape of it, the way it slanted across the wood, like it was something you could hold. Breakfast came from scraps again, bits of yesterday's bread, warmed near the fire until they were soft enough to chew. The last of the dried apples were shared sparingly, each piece cut into thin slices, as if the more delicate they looked, the more they might fill your stomach. Your mother drank her broth slowly, careful with each swallow, and you helped her shift a cushion behind her back so she could sit a little straighter. The air smelled faintly of iron and dust and something clean, something like soap, which your sister had used earlier to wash the baby's cloths in the basin. You spent the better part of the morning mending. A pair of socks whose heels had worn through. The edge of the blanket that had started to unravel. Your sister joined you with a sleeve that had come loose from her dress, and together you worked near the stove, trading thread and needles, the quiet rhythm of stitching broken only by the occasional sigh or soft comment. It felt good to do something that made a visible difference, even if small. To turn something broken into something that could stretch a little further, last a little longer. Your mother watched from her place near the wall, her hands folded, her eyes calm. Outside, the streets had begun to buzz again. The snow had mostly melted now, leaving behind the slick stones and sticky puddles that children stomped through with a kind of reckless delight. You watched them from the window, two girls chasing each other, scarves trailing behind them like flags, boots splashing as they turned tight corners around crates and stoops. A man pulled a wagon with one wheel squealing, a dog barked at a passing cat, and the butcher's boy leaned against the post with a smirk you'd seen before. Life, you realized, had started to stretch again, not as loudly or with great strides, but with small movements like fingers flexing after a long rest. Around midday, your father returned with a bag that jingled when he set it down. Not coins, but buttons, some loose, some still clinging to bits of fabric. He said the tailor had tossed them out when clearing the bins, and he thought you might find use in them. You ran your fingers through them, each one a different size, a different color, a different story. You imagined where they might have come from. A jacket too worn to save, a dress too faded to mend, and you smiled because now they were yours to use, to repurpose, to give new purpose. That afternoon, the apartment filled with the smell of broth again, this time made heartier with a few lentils your father had traded for at the docks. It wasn't much, but it changed the air, made it feel like something was simmering that wasn't just survival. Your mother ate her full share, then leaned back and dozed with the baby against her chest, the two of them breathing in sync. Your brother pressed a drawing into your hand, an image of your mother sleeping, the baby tucked beneath her chin, their hair blending into the same soft lines. You didn't speak, just touched his shoulder and nodded. The hours passed slowly, but not in the way they used to. There was no waiting for fever to break, no dread in each cough or twitch. There was just the work of keeping things moving, cleaning, mending, feeding, holding. That evening, your sister helped you clear space near the fire, and you found yourself humming without realizing it, a low circular tune that your mother used to sing when her hands were in the dough. She looked up at the sound, her mouth shaping the next line, and together you finished the verse. As the sky dimmed, your father lit the lamp early. Its wick was short, but it burned with a steadier light than before. You sat around it, your family drawn close, the warmth more than just heat. Your sister shared a story she remembered, one you hadn't heard in a long while, about a baker's daughter who traded loaves for secrets and wound up knowing every truth in town. Your mother laughed once, a soft rasp that still managed to warm the room. Your brother mimicked the girl's voice with exaggerated flair, and even the baby clapped his hands in delight. When bedtime came, no one rushed. You each moved slowly, folding blankets, brushing crumbs from the corners, straightening shoes by the door. You tucked your mother in with an extra shawl, kissed her forehead without embarrassment. She touched your hand as you pulled away and held it for just a moment, as if she needed to remember the feel of your skin. Then she let go and closed her eyes, her breath already deepening into sleep. You lay back on the mattress, the quilt pulled over you, your sister's feet cold against yours as always. You listened to the wind rattling the glass, softer than it had been, less like a threat, more like a song. You let your eyes close slowly, the day unfolding behind your lids in fragments, the light on the floorboards, the curve of your mother's smile, the sound of a story told around firelight. And as sleep came, it felt not like a collapse but a settling, a surrender into something earned. The cloth of your life was still patched, still worn, but it was holding, stretching, wrapping you in something that felt, if not whole, then enough. The morning that followed carried the scent of wet stone and last night's coals. The fire had died again, but it had left a pleasant sort of warmth in the room that lingered like a held breath, as if the walls themselves had chosen to remember it for just a while longer. You stirred slowly, curling your legs beneath the quilt before unfolding them with the careful grace of someone who knows the exact width of the bed even before opening their eyes. Your sister's hair lay in a dark spill across your shoulder, a few strands sticking to your cheek with the light dampness of sleep. She'd shifted sometime in the night, one arm thrown over your chest, her small hand resting where your ribs met your heart. You stayed still for a minute, eyes barely open, letting the early hush of the day soak into your bones. Your mother had woken first this time. That was new. You could hear her soft movements as she sat near the basin, soaking a rag, humming in a voice not strong, but not frail either. She was washing her face, you realized, and that realization brought a little knot of something warm and unspoken into your throat. You propped yourself up on your elbow and saw her clearly now, her back straight, her shoulders thin but steady. She glanced over and gave you a small wave, flicking water from her fingers in playful greeting. You smiled back, and that was enough. Words were still precious, saved for what mattered most, and this morning needed no explanation. The baby woke next, murmuring softly as he stretched like a cat beneath the blanket, his eyes still shut, but his fists beginning their daily exploration. He had grown since the fever days, subtly but surely. His cheeks were rounder, his gaze more focused. He locked eyes with you the moment they fluttered open and offered a sleepy grin before babbling nonsense, the syllables rising like bubbles through still water. You reached for him and pulled him close, pressing a kiss to his head. He smelled of wool and milk and the ever-present air of the room, a mix of dust, wood smoke, and bodies too close together for too long. Your sister stirred shortly after, groaning softly as she pulled herself upright, rubbing her eyes with both fists before blinking at the morning. Your brother didn't move at all, tucked deep into the corner where the quilt had stayed warmest, his face half hidden behind his elbow. You let him sleep. He had been restless the night before, sitting near the stove long after the rest of you had settled down, scribbling into his pad with the kind of focused fury that made you wonder what thoughts he was trying to pin down before they slipped away. Your father's absence wasn't alarming this time. He had left earlier than usual, probably before the sky even shifted from black to grey. You found the empty tin cup near the stove and the faint scent of tobacco that still clung to the air when he'd paused for a moment by the window before stepping out. You imagined him pulling his coat tighter, checking the tools in his pocket, muttering to himself about the weather. The familiar image settled into your mind like an old photo, blurred at the edges but still clear enough to comfort. Breakfast was meagre, but it was enough. Bits of bread toasted beside the fire, a cup of warm water with the last trace of broth stirred in. You shared the bread between you carefully, breaking it into near equal pieces, each child taking their share without complaint. The baby received his from your mother, who crumbled it into soft bits he could gum without trouble. He squealed in delight as he dropped half of it on the floor, then looked up at her with mischief glowing in his eyes. She chuckled, a full sound this time, raspy but real. And you watched her closely, trying not to cry at how good that laugh sounded. It had been so long. The day outside was cloudy, the kind of sky that couldn't make up its mind between rain and snow. You opened the window just a crack to let some air in, and were greeted by a gust that smelled of coal and cold steel, the flavor of the city waking up. Horses clattered past below, voices called out across streets, and somewhere far off, a bell rang once, then again. It could have been a factory bell or a school's warning. You didn't know. You only knew that it rang through the air and into your chest like a heartbeat from beyond the walls. You spent the late morning doing quiet chores. Your sister cleaned the baby's cloths and hung them near the fire to dry. Your brother finally rose, hair sticking out in all directions, eyes still soft with sleep, and shuffled over to the stove where he sat wordlessly for nearly half an hour, drawing the line of the bricks behind it. You swept the floor with a bent broom that left more behind than it picked up, but the motion of it, the effort, made the air feel clearer. Your mother even helped a little, folding cloths with you while seated, pausing often, but insisting on trying. She told a story while folding, a short one, about her own mother mending a tear in a coat so skillfully that no one could see where the rip had been. She described the way her mother had held the fabric up to the light, studying the weave, choosing the thread not by color, but by how it felt against her fingers. She said sometimes the strongest stitches are the ones no one notices because they hide themselves in the very work of holding things together. That was what love was, she said, not the big declarations, but the quiet thread you don't see. You thought about that for the rest of the day. By afternoon, your father returned, this time earlier than expected. He brought with him a wrapped package, rags, and an old rope binding a book, a real book. The corners were frayed, the cover faded beyond reading, but it was thick and it smelled like pressed flowers and ink. He handed it to your mother without ceremony, and she held it like it might fall apart in her hands. Your brother gasped when she opened it, flipping through the pages slowly, eyes skimming over paragraphs, fingers tracing the lines. It was a novel, one she'd read long ago, she said, though she couldn't remember how it ended. That night, after the baby had fallen asleep, after supper was eaten and cleared, your mother began to read aloud. Her voice was still quiet, but steadier now, and you leaned against the stove, listening to the cadence of her words, to the way the story filled the room with something new. It was a story of love and hardship, of stolen letters and long journeys, and though you didn't catch every word, the rhythm of it soothed you. Your brother curled on the floor with his notebook, sketching the characters as he imagined them. Your sister sat beside your mother, leaning on her shoulder, eyes closed but listening. When your mother's voice gave out after a few pages, she closed the book gently and rested it in her lap. No one said anything for a while. The fire crackled. The baby stirred in his sleep. Your father sat with his legs stretched out before him, nodding slowly. It wasn't silence, not really. It was full of meaning, full of the weight of days lived honestly, stitched together by hands that never stopped moving. And when you finally returned to your bed, when the quilt wrapped around you once more, and the air cooled with the fading heat of the fire, you thought again of the thread your mother spoke of. The kind that doesn't show, the kind that holds. And you let yourself drift into sleep with the warmth of her voice still humming in your mind, a quiet, invisible seam that stitched you gently to the safety of home. You slept deeply that night, the kind of sleep that takes you under like warm water, smooth and silent, and holds you there without fear. When morning broke, it did so gently. The light was softer than usual, diffuse and steady, not filtered through clouds or smoke, but shining through a cleaned window pane that someone must have wiped the day before. You noticed it first as a glow along the floorboards, a shimmer in the dust particles, hanging in the air like stars caught between breaths. The room was still and hushed, not with the heaviness of illness or the cold of want, but with a fullness that came from small certainties. It was the quiet of a family at rest, not because they had no troubles left, but because for now they knew how to carry them. You stirred beneath the quilt, stretching your toes, feeling the worn patches of the mattress through the fabric. Your sister was still curled beside you, one arm slung across her chest like a shield, her hair splayed across the pillow in tangled waves. The baby had somehow ended up half on top of her, one tiny hand tucked into the collar of her nightgown, the other resting flat against her cheek. He slept like only babies do, mouth open slightly, breath warm and even, completely unbothered by the world. Your brother, across the room, was already awake. You could hear the soft scratch of pencil against paper, the tiny rhythm of his thoughts being translated into lines and shapes. He didn't look up when you moved. He was lost in whatever world his hands were building. Your mother had slept too, that much was obvious. Her cheeks held a faint color again, and her face, though thinner than you remembered, looked peaceful. She lay tucked into the blanket, her breathing steady, her hands folded atop her stomach, as though in prayer or habit. You wondered what she had dreamed of, if it had been the old country, or the farm her father once promised, or the sea which she had only seen once from the edge of a pier on her first day in the city. You had always wondered what it must have been like for her, crossing that wide, cold water with nothing but a suitcase and a name someone had written down wrong at the port. The fire had gone out again, but not entirely. There was enough warmth left in the stove to suggest it hadn't been cold for long. You crouched and fed it the thinnest twigs first, then coaxed it into life with thicker sticks, careful not to wake the baby with the clatter. The flames returned slowly, licking at the cast iron like they knew their place. You watched them for a while, eyes half-lidded, lulled by the low crackle and the way the light moved across your hands. It was a ritual now, this tending of fire, a language you were learning by touch. Your father came home earlier than usual, a rare surprise. He stepped through the door with snow still clinging to his shoulders, boots thick with slush, and eyes that looked tired but clearer. He nodded at you as he set down a bundle wrapped in cloth, something heavy and soft. You unwrapped it slowly, revealing a small sack of potatoes, 2 onions, and something wrapped in brown paper that turned out to be salt pork, sliced thin. Your mother sat up at the smell of it, her lips curving into something that wasn't quite a smile, but close. Your father rubbed his hands together near the stove, then crouched to warm them by the open door. He didn't say where he'd been. He didn't need to. You helped your sister with the cooking. She peeled the potatoes with practiced swipes, her fingers quick despite the dull knife. You sliced the pork and set it to sizzle in the pan, the fat popping and crackling, filling the room with a smell that made your mouth water. The baby woke at the scent and began to fuss, but your mother lifted him easily and settled him in her lap, bouncing gently in rhythm to the sounds from the stove. Your brother abandoned his sketching long enough to pull the bread from the cupboard and break it into pieces, setting it on the table like it mattered where each chunk went. When the food was ready, you all sat close together, bowls in laps, spoons scraping gently. It wasn't a feast, but it was something more than survival. It was food that filled, food that tasted like something beyond necessity. Your mother ate slowly, closing her eyes after each bite. Your father chewed in silence, nodding faintly now and then, as though in agreement with the meal itself. Your brother tried to talk through a mouthful and earned a soft laugh from your sister, who dabbed his chin with a scrap of linen like he was 5 again. The baby dropped half a chunk of bread into the folds of your mother's skirt and squealed with pride. No one scolded him. The afternoon passed with a rare sort of ease. Your father dozed in his chair, one hand wrapped around the armrest, the other cradling a chipped mug half full of weak coffee. Your mother took the book in her lap again and read in small stretches, her voice still raw but sure. The story was winding now, full of longing and slow letters and the tension of 2 people trying to find each other in a city too wide for dreams. You didn't know how it would end, but that was all right. The not knowing was a kind of comfort too. Your brother lay beside the stove, drawing a scene from her words, shading in the windows and lamplight, sketching figures that leaned together beneath the falling snow. Later, as the light began to fade and the stove dimmed to coals, your mother asked you to fetch a small tin from the shelf above the door. Inside was a bundle of cloth, old and yellowed, tied with twine. She laid it gently across her lap and unfolded it with reverence, revealing thread, thimbles, and 2 needles. It was her sewing kit, one she hadn't touched since she'd taken ill. She ran her fingers over the pieces like she was greeting old friends. Then she looked at your sister and handed her a small square of worn muslin and said, simply, "Let's begin." They worked together at the table, your sister holding the cloth steady, your mother guiding her fingers, correcting her stitch with a tap or a look. They weren't making anything in particular, just practicing, mending, moving thread through fabric, the way breath moves through lungs. You sat beside them, content just to watch, letting the rhythm of their work soothe the room into stillness. Your father stirred once in his chair, looked over, and gave a soft hum of approval before settling back again. The baby slept in the corner now, curled on his side, his thumb near his mouth. Night came slowly, the kind that seeps rather than falls, and you lit the lamp when the shadows grew too long. The book was set aside, the food put away, the floor swept clear of crumbs. Your sister folded the cloth and placed it back in the tin, tying the string in a perfect bow. Your mother touched her cheek, a gentle brush of her knuckles, and whispered something you couldn't quite hear. Your brother fell asleep by the fire, sketchpad open on his chest, pencil still in hand. Your father covered him with the quilt without saying a word. You lay down last, taking one final look around the room. It wasn't perfect, wasn't polished or bright, but it held something now that hadn't been there before. Not just survival, not just silence. It held the memory of laughter, the thread of a shared story, the scent of food that had lingered longer than hunger. The floor creaked gently beneath your weight as you settled in, the mattress dipping where it always did. You pulled the blanket up to your chin and closed your eyes, the lamp still flickering behind your lids. And sleep came again, not out of exhaustion, but out of comfort. The comfort of light beneath the floorboards, of hands that mended cloth, of a voice reading stories into the dark. You didn't dream of riches or escape, but of this same room, these same people, the warmth of their breathing, the knowledge that tomorrow you would rise and do it all again. And that maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The dreams that held you through the night were quiet ones. Not the kind with wild stories or strange turns, but the kind that feel like memory. You dreamed of bread that didn't run out, of your mother's hands folding clean laundry in the sunlight, of your brother's pencil lines becoming whole pictures on the walls, each one filled with color that moved when you blinked. And when morning found you again, you woke not suddenly, but as if being gently called back, like a tide returning to shore without a sound. The quilt was still warm. Your sister's foot pressed lightly against yours beneath the covers, her breath soft and even. The baby had wedged himself between the wall and your arm, head resting against your ribs, his little fingers tangled in the fabric of your sleeve, like he'd anchored himself there in sleep. Your mother was already awake. She sat in her chair by the stove, the book open in her lap, though she wasn't reading it, just holding it with both hands as if it gave her something steady to rest her eyes on. The fire hadn't been lit yet, and the room still held that early grey hush, the air cool enough to keep you tucked under the covers for just a few more minutes. Your brother stirred soon after, pulling the quilt over his head, as though hoping to disappear for a little longer. But then the baby rolled over and smacked him in the face with a half-asleep stretch, and the spell broke with a grunt and a sleepy laugh. You rose slowly, joints stiff from stillness, and padded over to the stove, lifting the lid with care, brushing ash into the basin with your sleeve. The coals had gone cold this time, truly cold, and you gathered twigs from the corner, lit the match with numb fingers, watched the flame flutter against the dampness in the air. It caught eventually, and the warmth that followed felt earned. You stood there with your hands stretched toward it, eyes closed, listening to the creaks of the room as it came awake, piece by piece. Your father arrived not long after, and the surprise was not that he had something with him, but that what he carried made sound, a harmonica, not new, certainly not clean, but intact. He held it up with a grin that started small but widened at your mother's raised eyebrows. He said a man at the warehouse had owed him a favor, and he didn't need it for more than food anymore. You weren't sure if he meant the harmonica or the man, but it didn't matter. What mattered was the sound it made when he raised it to his lips and breathed out a soft, wavery note that seemed to hang in the air longer than it should. It wasn't music, not yet, just breath and tin and hope. But the baby clapped anyway, delighted, and your mother tilted her head, her smile curving slow and deep. Your brother snatched up his pad and began sketching the curve of the harmonica, his pencil tracing the light and shadows across your father's hand. You boiled water while your sister sliced the last of the potatoes, her movements brisk and sure. Breakfast was light but warm, and for once no one spoke through it. The sound of chewing, of spoon against tin, of the harmonica's occasional hum. These things filled the space like language. That day, the apartment seemed larger somehow, Maybe it was the light, or maybe it was just that the weight of illness and silence had lifted enough to let your eyes see the corners again. Your mother stood for the first time in days, her steps slow and cautious, but determined. She moved from the chair to the window and back, resting at each pause but not needing help. Your sister watched her like a shadow, always ready to step in but never needing to. The strength was coming back like sap rising in trees too long frozen. Your brother surprised everyone by asking your father to show him how to play. The harmonica, he meant. Your father looked startled, not because of the question, but because it came from the boy who usually kept to his drawings and silence. He nodded once, sat down on the edge of the bed, and handed it over. What followed wasn't exactly a lesson, but more of a passing. He played a few notes, then gestured. Your brother imitated them, failing, trying again, frowning, then grinning when he hit one right. The sound was off-key, breathy, broken in places. But it was music. It was music in a room that had not known it for so long. The neighbors must have heard, but no one complained. In fact, a knock came later, soft and brief, and when you opened the door, it was the boy from 2 doors down, holding a tin with biscuits still warm. His mother had baked. He'd heard the music, thought maybe you'd like to share. You thanked him more with your eyes than with words, and when you closed the door, the room felt even fuller. Not of things, not of noise, but of presence, of connection. Like you were part of a map whose lines you hadn't realized were drawn around you all along. Your mother read more of the book that afternoon, her voice growing stronger with each chapter. The story was near its end now, the lovers drawing closer, the distance between them closing with every page. Your sister listened while braiding her hair, the baby bouncing in her lap. Your father polished the harmonica with a strip of cloth, eyes distant, perhaps remembering something you'd never know. You watched them all, trying to memorize the texture of the moment. The light on your mother's cheek, the sound of your brother exhaling through his teeth, the smell of biscuits cooling on the windowsill. Evening came softly, like a lullaby. The fire burned low, the room lit by both lamp and leftover warmth. Supper was shared in quiet contentment, the biscuits halved and savored, the last of the onions cooked down until sweet. Your sister dozed against the wall. Your mother hummed the tune your father had played earlier, the melody fragile but carried with care. And when you finally lay down, the quilt pulled tight beneath your chin, the baby nestled between you again. You felt something loosen in your chest. Not a loss, not a fear, just the release that comes when you know, for this one night, everything has held. Sleep did not rush in, but it didn't delay either. It met you at the edge of thought and took your hand. You sank into it with gratitude, the music still faint in your ears, the laughter of earlier echoing behind your eyes. And somewhere, deep in the hush between breaths, you felt the city around you breathing too. Behind every wall, beneath every floorboard, families were making warmth from what little they had, turning air and thread and hope into shelter. And in that shared silence, in that unseen music, you slept. The next morning came with a brightness that startled you. Not just light through the window, but color too. There was a thin line of blue in the sky above the rooftops, and the sunlight was warm enough to touch. It spread across the room like a blessing, falling across faces and blankets and the tired planks of the floor in long golden strokes. You opened your eyes slowly, blinked against the unexpected softness. And for the first time in weeks, your very first thought was not about hunger or illness or wood for the fire. It was about the sound of the birds. There had been a few calls now and then in the past days, scratchy and uncertain, but this morning you heard a full chorus outside the window. Sparrows mostly, maybe one or two doves, their songs simple but insistent, as though the season itself had changed its mind overnight. You lay there still for a while, wrapped in the quilt. Your sister's breath soft beside you, the baby nestled against her back, one tiny fist rising and falling with each slow breath. Your brother had curled at the foot of the bed again, a habit he had picked up during your mother's worst nights and never quite dropped. He was awake already, sketchbook resting on his knees, his pencil moving in careful arcs. He didn't look up when you stirred, only nodded slightly, like he had been waiting for you to join him in this quiet hour before the room woke fully. Your mother was still asleep, her lips slightly parted, her brow relaxed. She looked younger in sleep, or maybe just less guarded. The lines that had etched themselves so deeply around her eyes had softened, the shadow of pain no longer as dark beneath her skin. You watched her chest rise and fall and thought how strange it was that something so simple could carry such weight. Breath had once been so ordinary. Now it was a marvel. The stove had gone cold again, but you didn't mind. You moved slowly, easing out from beneath the quilt, careful not to disturb the delicate tangle of limbs beside you. The floor was chilly, but the sun warmed your back as you walked. You crouched by the hearth, gathering the firewood you'd stored in the corner yesterday. There was still enough at least for a few days, maybe more if rationed well. You struck the match on the rough edge of the mantel and watched the flame leap to life, catching the kindling in bursts of amber. The scent of smoke rose quickly, sharp and familiar, and you fed the fire in quiet meditation, hands moving with practiced ease. Your father returned not long after the fire had caught. He looked different. Not in any dramatic way, but there was something in his posture, the way he set down his coat, the way he greeted your mother with a quiet brush of his fingers against her shoulder. He said he'd heard from someone at the yard that there might be longer work soon, real work, steady work. Nothing promised, nothing sure, but still. The kind of hope that spoke in the corners of conversation, not in declarations. Your mother said nothing, just reached out for his hand and squeezed it once before letting go. Breakfast was shared without fanfare. Bread, thin and dry, dipped into tea made, weak with extra water, but it was warm. The baby gummed a crust and drooled happily. Your brother sketched the teacup. Your sister tried to braid her hair without a mirror, and you helped her without speaking, your fingers remembering the rhythm from so many mornings before. When the braid was done, she smiled and touched your hand. Not for long, but long enough. That afternoon, the air outside was warmer still. You opened the window wide and let it in. The room smelled different with the fresh air blowing through. Less like sickness, more like laundry dried in the sun. The city sounded different too, louder, yes, but not angry, just alive. Footsteps on stone, distant laughter, the wheel of a cart squealing around a corner. Your father went out again, this time with his shoulders squared. He said he'd try for the yard. You packed him a small scrap of bread, and he didn't say thank you, but he looked at you like he meant to. Your mother read again that day. The story was almost finished. The lovers had found each other, of course, not in the way they'd hoped, but in the way that mattered. There was a quiet to the ending, a soft note of survival rather than triumph. Your sister listened with her eyes closed. The baby fell asleep in your lap, thumb tucked between his gums. Your brother drew a street scene from the final chapter, the two characters walking away into the dusk, coats drawn tight, hands not touching but near. Your mother closed the book with both hands and rested it in her lap, No one clapped. No one needed to. You spent the rest of the day cleaning. The kind of deep cleaning that meant something. You and your sister scrubbed the floor until the wood shone faintly, swept beneath the beds, shook out the blankets near the open window. Your brother gathered the bits of string and paper that had accumulated in the corners and folded them neatly into a box for later use. Your mother sorted the sewing tin, untangling the threads, setting aside the needles that had dulled. She even hummed as she worked, a sound so rare and sweet that you stopped mid-scrub to listen. When the sun began to dip, your father returned. He was flushed, not from exertion, but from hope. The yard manager had spoken to him directly. Said he'd need men come Monday. Nothing guaranteed, but something real. A date. A plan. Your mother's eyes shimmered, though no tears fell. Your father didn't embrace her, not in front of everyone, but he touched her hand again, the same way as before. It was enough. That night, the fire burned bright, not just for heat, but for light, for celebration, in a quiet, reserved sort of way. Your sister sang a song your grandmother used to sing, her voice low and steady. Your mother joined in, softly. Your brother played the harmonica again, the notes still uncertain, still warbling, but now with a rhythm that seemed deliberate. The baby clapped at the sound, bouncing in place on your lap. Your father watched it all from the chair in the corner, his face tired but calm. You went to bed with the window cracked open just a little, the air fresh against your cheek. You pulled the quilt close, curled beside your sister, the baby tucked between you once more. Your brother slept near the stove again, the harmonica tucked beneath his pillow. Your mother, resting now, the book set carefully on the shelf, her head turned toward the window, where the breeze stirred the curtain. Your father sat a little longer by the fire, silent, maybe praying, maybe just thinking. Sleep came differently this time, not like falling, not like surrender, but like stepping into a room you had been waiting to enter. A room full of everything that had kept you going, breath and bread and song, the sound of firelight, the echo of your mother's voice, the music your brother made by accident, the scent of spring in the city's breath. And as you drifted deeper, the feeling stayed with you, that something had shifted, not loudly but permanently, that the days were beginning to bend towards something lighter. The room held its breath as morning unfolded, not in fear or in waiting, but in a kind of quiet awe, as though even the walls recognized that something had turned. You opened your eyes to a sky just beginning to bloom, soft purples and pale oranges brushing the space between rooftops like watercolor washed across old parchment. The window was open by just a finger's width, and through it came a breeze that smelled faintly of something green, not quite grass, not yet blossoms, but of life coming back from the edges. It swept through the room like a whisper, waking the dust and the hanging cloth and something deeper in you that had been curled tight all winter. Your sister shifted beside you, still asleep, her face tucked into the crook of your arm. The baby slept on his back for once, arms flung out like he'd fallen into sleep mid-laughter. Your brother had moved in the night, his feet now facing the stove, sketchpad still beneath his head, a small line of graphite smudged across his cheek. Your mother was awake, already sitting up in her chair, her hands folded gently in her lap, her gaze fixed on the window like it was a painting hung just for her. When she turned toward you, her eyes were clear, not free of pain, but clear of that faraway fog that had hung over her for so many weeks. You smiled at her without words, and she returned it, a quiet nod, a moment shared. Your father had gone again, though this time his absence felt more like motion than distance, He had work now, or would soon, and the knowledge of that had changed the shape of his leaving. It wasn't vanishing, it was effort. His coat was missing from the peg, and so was the extra pair of boots, the better ones, with the leather repaired at the toe. You thought of him stepping out onto the street before the sun, one hand in his pocket, the other gripping his tools, his mind full of nails and measurements and maybe, just maybe, a little song, the kind he didn't sing out loud, but you sometimes heard him hum without knowing he was doing it. You moved quietly that morning, not out of caution, but out of respect for the stillness. You fed the fire, warmed water, checked the corners of the room for new drafts. Your brother stirred when the kettle whistled, blinking like a cat and muttering something about needing to finish a drawing before the light changed. Your sister woke soon after, hair tangled, cheeks flushed, reaching instinctively for the baby even before her eyes were fully open. He blinked at her, then broke into a toothless smile so wide it made you all laugh, the sound light and round in the air, like bubbles rising from a spring. The bread was thinner than ever, but there was more joy in sharing it that day than on any day you could remember. The baby threw his piece on the floor almost immediately, then shrieked in delight when your brother retrieved it and pretended to scold him. Your mother sat with her hands wrapped around the cup of warm water, inhaling the steam like it was perfume, like it held something sacred. She asked your sister to bring her the sewing tin again, and together they mended a tear in the baby's wrap while the kettle cooled and the sun crawled higher. As the day opened up, so did the city. You heard it in the streets, in the way boots landed differently now, not stomping, but striding. Carts rolled smoother, voices carried farther. Someone whistled a tune as they passed under your window, and another answered it from down the block. Your brother ran errands that morning, delivering a note for a neighbor, and returning with a heel of cheese someone had traded for a drawing. You wondered if it was really worth that much, but he didn't care. He held it like treasure and sliced it into 5 perfect wedges on a chipped plate before placing one gently on your mother's tongue. Later, as the light shifted toward afternoon, your sister opened the window fully and hung 2 blankets over the sill, the air fresh enough now to trust. The room filled with the smell of spring in the making, damp stone, warming brick, and something like wet iron, deep and rich. Your mother lay down with the baby pressed against her chest, both of them dozing in the shaft of sunlight that fell across the floorboards. You and your brother sat near the window watching people below. A man selling ribbons, shouting in 3 languages, a woman with baskets of eggs, one broken and dripping down her apron, children chasing each other with sticks and laughter. All of it familiar, but softened by time and weather and the passing of a long, hard season. The harmonica came out again that evening. Your brother had learned to play one song properly now, slow and plaintive, something that sounded like the space between dreaming and waking. He played it while your mother hummed along and your father returned home with dust on his sleeves and a smile beneath his tired eyes. He sat, with the baby on his knee, bouncing him gently to the rhythm, nodding to the beat. You watched them, heart full and aching all at once, the weight of survival and the grace of it settling into your bones like warmth. That night, supper was modest, but it felt like a celebration anyway. Bread dipped in broth, slivers of onion and carrot from a neighbor's handout, a handful of lentils that had been saved for weeks. You ate slowly, savoring every bite, every sound of spoon against bowl. The fire was strong, the air clean, the room filled with a peace that felt hard-earned. Your sister sang again, a lullaby your mother had taught her when you were small. Your mother joined in, her voice thin but steady. Your brother played the harmonica's soft undercurrent, the tune winding through the corners of the room, like thread tying everything together. When bedtime came, no one rushed. Your father stoked the fire one last time. Your mother kissed each of your foreheads with the same soft smile. Your brother tucked the harmonica away with care. You lay down together, the quilt pulled up, the baby curled against your sister's back. You closed your eyes and listened to the city outside, not with fear or hunger, but with gratitude. You listened to the voices, the wheels, the footfalls. You listened to the breath of your family, steady and warm. And then you let go. Sleep met you like an old friend, not with urgency, but with welcome. It wrapped itself around you, weaving in and out of the sounds and smells and light that now filled the space between your days. And as you drifted down, deeper and quieter, you knew that what had once been struggle had become something else entirely. A rhythm, a story, a memory already forming, and that whatever came next, you would meet it not as someone merely surviving, but as someone who had endured and kept the light alive.